Hey everyone, myself and DáNiel are super excited for our discussion and our guest tonight. So welcome to Greater Talks, episode 4. I think it's going to be a discussion amongst peers and patriots, if I dare say, and people that are passionate about the next generation. Is it episode 5? Really?
It's episode 5 already.
So we're going to leave that error in, and I'm going to fundamentally state that I made that error, so this is episode 5. But nonetheless, listen, the point is very excited for the discussion tonight.
Yeah.
I'm going to give a short intro, and I'm going to actually just read it out, because I think, we work on a principle to give honor where honor is due, and Thabo has certainly earned a bit of a pedigree that I think is worth honoring. So Thabo is a corporate and investment banking professional. He's a finance leader. He's a strategist, a business developer. He loves traveling, obviously. He's a transformation, diversity, and inclusion advocate. He's a storyteller, a brilliant one at that, if I might add. And he's a social impact champion. And something that I really like in your bio, Thabo, is that you're unapologetically pro-Africa. And if I might humbly mention that he's also a chartered accountant.
Yes.
And he's also completed his executive master's in finance at INSEAD, which I think receives or actually deserves applause. And then, to not put Thabo on the spot, but when we had our introductory discussions here, I actually Thabo had to correct me on the pronunciation of his surname, and I'm going to ask you maybe for our audience just to share a bit on that because he's super knowledgeable on it. And it's Thabo Limema, but his surname is spelled and it starts with an L-I. So Thabo, if you'd like to just share some of that exceptional wisdom of yours to our audience, that'd be great.
Look, I think firstly, thank you for having me. I
Yes.
appreciate the opportunity to come here and engage.
Thanks.
I listened to your first episode. I wrote on the comment. I'm like, you know what? The things that you guys are talking about are actually very important, and I'd like to be a part of this conversation. So I think for me is just to speak, my mind, speak from the heart, have authentic conversations with people that live in a country that they care about, that they love. I think there's a lot of things we have in common.
100%.
Often the country focus too much on the divisions, but less on the things that bring us together. So that's the theme for today. On your note, Stefan, so my surname L-I, and L-I in Sesotho is pronounced D. Now you may have seen some people with names Lipalesa or Likeledi or Mupeli. The L-I is actually a D there because the history of the pronunciation comes from Lesotho. So my family is originally from the Kingdom of Lesotho. The Kingdom of Lesotho was heavily influenced by colonizers, different colonizers. So the British were the main ones. So if you've looked, the King of Lesotho, for example, was at King Charles' coronation. There's a history where Princess Diana has come to Lesotho, her children, even Harry's been to Lesotho fairly recently, right? So there's a history for the British, but also the literature of the Basotho people are also heavily influenced by the French. You write an L, there's an I, there's a friend of mine, her name is Tisetso. She still insists to write the L with the kapi with the two, little dots at the top and to add the... So all of that are things that are influenced by people that came into the country and taught people how to read and write. And just the way we say things is heavily influenced by a diversity of people from different backgrounds. So I think it's a rich thing to also talk about because our writing is influenced by people that are different to us, but we've accepted that and it's part of who we are. And another story, I know you didn't ask me this, but I'll volunteer it. If you look at the Basotho blanket, let's say Siana Marena, you will see the blanket has like yellow colors. Let's say it's a blue blanket, which is what the color is. It's got a bit of black, it's got a bit of white, but the yellow marks on that blanket were actually a manufacturing fault.
Oh my
They
goodness.
took it to be manufactured, and when they presented it to the king, it had these yellow lines,
Wow.
and it was a manufacturing fault, and the king said, you know what? Keep it. I like it as it is because it symbolizes that we are imperfect, we're people, and let's keep this throughout the times when we make these blankets because humanity is not perfect.
Oh,
So
wow, that's
an
a beautiful
interesting
thing.
point there to add to the
That's
history of the
super
Basotho
cool.
people, but yeah.
Well, that adds towards our conversation we're going to have tonight. So,
That definitely sort of, I think, affects our influx here. So maybe let's touch on something that you mentioned there. And it's because we're obviously going to talk about entrepreneurship and actually
Yeah.
breaking the back of poverty and things like that. But I think moving towards that, right? I think you mentioned the kingdom of. Wait, I'm
Lesotho.
confused. The kingdom of Lesotho,
Yes.
right? You mentioned the kingdom
The
of
mountain
Lesotho.
kingdom, as it's
Yes,
colloquially
and
known.
then 100%, and then the touch on colonization and all of those things, and then obviously now this beautiful story with regards to the blanket. So I think maybe a great introductory question would be, off the bat, is how do we keep the beautiful parts of our heritage, right?
Yeah.
And move on from the tougher parts of our heritage and actually move forward, because I mean, something like that definitely is valuable, in terms of our heritage, right? And I mean, it's a beautiful story. And I think as Africans and the South Africans, irrespective of your color, your religion or whatever, you feel something when you hear a story like that. Point being, there are beautiful parts in terms of our heritage. Obviously, there's a very difficult part in our heritage. So how do we sort of keep what we need to keep, right? And what do we need to keep? And how do we actually maybe move forward and away from the things that we should move away from them if we indeed need to?
Look, I think that's a very interesting question. So I think the context that I want to add to that question is at an individual level. Because who you are, like my priest used to say, we are the sums of our yesterdays and products of our choices. Everything that has made you who you are today is as a result of both good and bad experiences. So all of that are things that are responsible for ultimately how you guys are showing up today and how I'm showing up. So I would say, with regards to the history of the country, the history of the continent, because Africa did suffer a lot in the periods of colonization. I don't think it's good to glorify colonization because it hurt people. It created a lot of resentment that still lives today. And there's things that came from colonization that are scars that many people carry, even in countries that benefited from it, like in the United States, for example. They celebrate Black History Month in February, and they talk about how they don't know their roots because they were taken away and literally ripped from their umbilical cords, which is their motherland. So there's still pain that's not experienced by us here, but people elsewhere that are part of the diaspora. But I think it's important not to, as I said, the past that we inherit has both good and bad. The fact that you and I can have a conversation today, that's good. Because there's communication, there's engagement.
Yes.
Someone had to teach a person how to converse in a particular language. I could literally sit here and say, "Dumelang ke nna Thabo Limema." Like,
Understood the first part, right?
yes, Dumelang, right?
And to be fair,
That's-
which in its essence is a bit of a problem.
Yeah,
And we can attend to it.
It's a problem in itself, and we can attend to it later, and I'd like to do that. But I think the importance of building bridges of understanding as opposed to barriers of misunderstanding is a lot more constructive in getting us to move forward as a collective, as a people. So I think the history we have, the fact that some of our people can go to other countries and see something, even though the colonizer country had some evil stuff, they can go there and say, I can relate to that because I've seen it back home. I've seen a beret worn by my auntie. Now I see a French guy walking in the street wearing a red beret, playing an instrument that I've heard back home. So I think while, today we celebrate globalization, a lot of it came in the time when colonization started and we started learning about each other. Power dynamics, obviously, and other human features took over. Greed, lust, envy, all the things that made the pain what it was, which is human nature and I guess part of the deadly sins. I think the things that we celebrate today about humanity are things that we can definitely learn from in our history as a country, as a people. And yeah, I'd say the trajectory of the world is towards good, in my view.
I agree.
If I look at humanity, how we converse, how we speak to each other, how we relate. Today, I was watching a Shaka series the other day, and they were literally putting guys, taking them on a boat, kicking them. Black people were enslaving other black people and throwing them on ships. At that time, that was okay because that was trade. There was a commodity, there was a person, there was a good
Well, that was
property.
what they knew. So
and
that was
for them at the time, this is our job. This is how I make a living to feed my family. But today, if someone does that, it's wrong.
Yeah.
So I'm just using those two examples to show how
it's the extremes,
we
but it's the
define
easiest way
things.
to draw the line.
The interesting thing for me, though, is what is it that we're doing today that generations down, they'll say, that was bad. I can't believe my great-grandparents used to do these
no, I
kind of
get
things,
you.
you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah,
That's a tough thought.
And for me, and it's really for us getting to a common thing where we can, because we need to have unity and we need to strive towards that unity. And one thing for me is, because I believe, and I'm not 100% sure when you watch that, the video of Shaka, King Shaka.
Ilembe. Yeah.
Surely there was a huge language barrier then. So there wasn't a common language in the sense of English, and everybody spoke English proper.
Yeah.
Because I know the Afrikaner didn't want to even speak English because that was, the foreign language.
Yeah.
And obviously the Zulus, and so the language barrier only, I think, would have been one of, and it's something that I just thought of now, but that's maybe one of the huge issues why there was never maybe common ground, because they couldn't communicate with each other.
Yeah, to a
usually
large
they had
extent.
talks and stuff, I assume. Not 100% sure on that, but the thing is they couldn't sit down like this and have a proper conversation because of, so I believe the language barrier could be something.
Yeah.
But
Well, let's touch on that, right? Because
Yeah.
because you did mention it, and because I'm going to be honest. Listen, I think there's a bit of a challenge with that today as well.
no,
you
there
know.
is.
And I'll tell you why. Well, for me, I sort of decided, listen, I wanted to at least start learning isiZulu, right? I don't know why that was my starting point, but I thought this is where I wanted to start, right? So I actually got a tutor, started with the tutoring classes.
Yeah.
And I mean, two things, like, right, still committed to learn the language.
Yeah.
Not that easy, though.
Yeah.
So now I'm sitting at 34 years of age, right? And I'm giving my best because I'm trying, but ultimately it's not that easy. Here's the question that I wanted to ask, right?
Yeah.
Do you think that it's actually worthwhile across the board for all, let me say, African/South Africans, right, to actually go that route? Or do you think we just go with English because that's sort of the whole globalization picture, and we've got AI that's going to remove language, possibly?
Yeah.
It's an
Yeah.
honest question.
Yeah.
No, it's a fair question.
I think it's definitely struck a nerve in Parliament.
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. That's fair. Look, first of all, our mother tongue's not English.
Yeah.
Right?
No.
You guys are Afrikaans,
Yeah,
Sotho,
Yeah.
and we had to find a language that allows us to converse,
communicate,
for
yeah.
instance,
Yes.
right? So I think from that perspective, there is value in having a language that can create commonality in sharing concepts, etc. But even within the same language, there's a misunderstanding because language is only a medium of communication,
Yeah.
but the intent is very different
I get you.
in different contexts. Culture, how we say
No,
things.
that's-
When I say something, I look at you, those sort of body language and other facts of communication. But I am a believer, before we speak about what you're asking me, in preserving indigenous languages.
Okay.
I think people that speak Sesotho should strive to preserve their languages. Zulu people, I like that Shaka Ilembe is in Zulu and they speak beautiful Zulu. And their kids can watch that and be like, wow, that's me.
I
there.
agree, yeah.
And they see themselves. Afrikaans, things like, obviously the history of the country has a lot of pain around, apartheid and the things that came there. And as a result of that, there were institutions of higher learning that were very Afrikaans focused. The unfortunate thing, in my view, is now when you want to break those institutions down and remove the benefit they come with for a community that speaks that language, as opposed to saying, how do we build Sesotho academic content?
Yeah.
How do we build Zulu, Xhosa,
Yeah.
Venda, all the languages, and have those institutions serve the country in a way that represents the demographics of the country, right? So my take on the language thing is preservation is important, especially as I believe it's getting diluted. My Sesotho today is not as good as my
I
grandfather's
get you.
Sesotho.
Yeah.
So
No,
that worries
it
me.
gets slangish.
So when
Well,
I
the
was
same
saying
with
to
our
you,
Afrikaans, right?
Yeah.
when I was telling you about the future, what our kids are gonna say, they're probably gonna judge us on how badly we preserved our languages.
Yeah.
But I digress. Let me come to your question. I think it's very important for people to be able to engage. I think Nelson Mandela had a very nice quote around this because if you speak a person to a person in their natural language, you speak to their heart. It shows that you've made an effort to try and communicate them in a way that values their humanity and values you see them, and you've actually made an effort to engage
Because you know
them
it's not
where they
easy
are.
to learn
It's
it,
not
so-
easy, bro. Like,
Yeah.
even with me, dude, like, I tried to learn a bit of French when I was going to stay in Mauritius on my, you know, I was telling you I was there for a little bit. I traveled Europe. I try to learn basic words to introduce myself to some, you know, a waiter. You know, je m'appelle Thabo, et toi, un vin rouge, s'il vous plaît. Like, and people really like that.
Of course.
So it speaks
Even
to a
though it
person's
was
heart.
just maybe the
I
basics.
broke it, by the way. I didn't care about my pronunciation because the problem with
Does Zulu come in a little bit?
countries like France, if you speak English, they don't like that because there's a bit of tension between the French and the English. And when they gave me that, I responded in Sesotho. And I said, well, if I speak my mother tongue, I know you know, so
But the intent was pure.
the intent was pure, but I think if you make an effort to understand and learn a person's language, it shows that, man, I'm really trying hard to build bridges here.
No, that's for sure.
Not
That's-
impose my language and expect you to respond without me trying to meet you halfway.
Yes.
Listen, I saw that first, Andy. My father can speak, yes, most of the languages. He speaks Sesotho, like really well. He grew up in the Brits area, Fontaine area. So he grew up, you know, speaking Sesotho. And he learned, obviously, the other languages. But I saw firsthand-handedly how that just him speaking and communicating to people in their mother tongue. How much, you know, how much more respect just towards both parties.
Relationships.
It's
trust.
super.
It's the first building bridge of any relationship. Trust.
that's-
If you speak my language, maybe you're on my side. But what have you got to say?
Yeah.
You know?
Well, it's just that barrier to break through
Yeah.
that barrier to be able to communicate. Because yes, and I cannot remember the saying, but it's I quoted it the other day. But it comes down to you cannot. There's the willingness to listen. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to hear. So if you've got the guard, you won't be able to hear whatever somebody's communicating. And it's almost like what we're coming down to now is that the communication thing, and this is something I do understand the importance of it, but it's something that maybe, because listen, Thabo, we after unity. We want to get to the unity thing.
Yes.
And if it takes us to 4,000 guests, so be it.
Yeah.
But we're going to run for that unity thing and, you know, build the whole, and you'll hear us mentioning this so that we can drive, you know, the conversation totally and constantly towards that, because I believe there will be that one thing that we're going to get to, even if it's the language or the communication thing, because communication are super. The message, to get your message across and to have your, you know, because nobody do something purely out of a bad intent the whole time. You cannot be, I don't believe everybody, no matter who you are, listen, in the political game.
Unless you psycho and you.
But you cannot have a bad intent purely, but it's how you come across. What's that pure intent that you come across with, and the communication with, and that to actually express what you're feeling. And sometimes people, when they, not to say uneducated, but if they weren't, you know, educated to communicate well, that could be something difficult to express. And then it comes out within some actions or whatever, and then we sit on the other side, or you sit on the other side, and now there's a big fight or whatever. You know, I don't want to go into specific things, but that could be some of the issues. Because
Well, I'll say at the least, I think it's maybe a very good starting point. You know, at least one of the starting points, but something to really consider. You know?
Yeah.
Because I mean, I do think that it pulls the heartstrings, at least as a starting
Yeah.
point when you're going to have the conversation. Ultimately, I think all of us understand that actions speak louder than words.
Yeah.
But if it's backed by a common language or the ability to actually communicate well, that
Yeah.
certainly carries some value.
So maybe let me ask you something.
Shoot for the moon.
Die volgende keer ek kom hierso, ek sal gesels met julle in Sesotho en ek sal vra, hoe gaan dit? Is dit maklik?
And we need to be able to
And I-
respond.
En 'n hele
so the
moed-
challenge
exactly.
is that ons Zulu bietjie praat.
Yes.
Well, Sutu, right? But I mean, listen, to be fair, let's take up
a
that
challenge.
challenge, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
It's a
I think
challenge.
it's a
We
fair
all
challenge,
accept it.
right? Okay, I mean, let's maybe
Okay,
look to
good.
the future a bit.
Yes.
Yeah, so I mean, listen, Thabo, obviously you are super passionate about, well, about a lot of things, but I think the best starting point for us is going to be the skills that are required for the future world.
Yeah.
And I think South Africa and Africa obviously's
Yeah.
current position in terms of this, and how do we progress in terms of the skills that are required for the future economy, right? You're welcome to share your thoughts on that, and I think then we can move in that direction.
Yeah. Look, as I said, the skills that made people successful a decade ago, a century ago, are very different. So the only constant in our ability to be relevant is change, and we need to be adaptive. But adapting is something that is very uncomfortable to many people, and they'd rather stay in the, very cozy area. But when you talk about the future, you actually start seeing aspects of that show themselves today. The geopolitical issues that happen between the US and China and many other things that affect us, right? And if I can use a skill as an example, when President Xi Jinping spoke at the BRICS summit last year, he said one of the things that they want to start exchanging information on and intelligence and skill is around artificial intelligence. I know we were speaking about AI earlier, but everyone knows that China is one of the most highly educated countries. They are very intentional. And the beautiful thing about China is that they teach their people in their language. They teach people in Mandarin. And so they do things at the core based on what they understand. Whereas countries like South Africa, we teach people, most of the country is not English, by the way, right? So you teach them in a language where they have to firstly bridge the language barrier and then learn and then apply that learning in a context that makes sense. So I think there's a lot of work that we need to do from a skills of the future perspective to think around how do we use the very AI we're talking about to then start translating certain aspects of education into vernacular languages that people can understand. So I'd say future skills, there needs to be tools that are needed to be evolved and developed to enable those skills to be taught in a way that meets people where they are. But we can't deny the fact that the world is competitive. People are keen for applying themselves in challenging environments. People want to work where they feel fulfilled. And that skill, unfortunately, we've seen it leave this country. One of my biggest concerns is seeing how very talented people go apply themselves elsewhere, despite this country investing in their education, in their upskilling, their parents sacrificing a lot for them to do well. Hopefully, their parents would want them to do well for their country and for their ancestors, the land that they're born. But it happens that people go, you know what? I love this country. My mom has sent me to go study in the US. I've pretty much settled down here. I'll apply my skill here because I'm earning dollars. It's safer. There's all these things that work well here that don't in South Africa where I'll get a, load shedding every now and then. But the skills of the future, because, if you look at these lists that they give out, you look at the top leaders of some of the biggest companies in the United States, it's mostly Indians. Indians are very clear about educating their people. And they're leading some of the biggest companies. I mean, people talk about Elon Musk, a few other South Africans there, but if you think about what makes a country prosperous, and I think Barack Obama put it nicely, a country that out-educates us today will outperform us tomorrow.
That's it.
So if you don't invest in getting the right skills, and I'll say this, and I'm sorry to say this, but our education system, our teachers need to change their mindset from making it about them and more about the children. If you make it about the children, you make it about the future, you make it about making them fit for purpose, you're making them resilient. Yes, you'll make them adaptable so they can be marketable to any other country they want to go to, but hopefully they stay and contribute that skill here. That's the key that we need to get right around the instrument way of teaching too.
And me and Stefan had this discussion in episode 4, actually the previous episode, where we spoke about the importance of a teacher.
Yeah.
I don't listen, I don't think, and not to say, let me not go there, but teachers are most probably the most important beings in the country to get us to a new generation and to a new mindset, because they've got so much power to actually either uplift a child or break that child, or, because most of the people that I know of, that's either, got some sort of, not to say not feeling good about themselves or lacking some confidence or something in that line. But most of that stuff comes out of either teachers not believing in children, saying that you cannot do it. We heard it the other day of a guy, senior, that he actually were pulled up in a rugby team, but he was a good rugby player. And the senior coach there just asked him, "What are you doing here?" And he said, "Coach, but I'm pulled up." And the coach asked him, "Listen, what are you doing here?" And he's like, "Yeah, I've been pulled up." That's not a good thing. A teacher doesn't understand what impact they have towards that child, because in that moment, the coach said to him, "Listen, I don't believe in you."
Yeah.
That's wrong. And they don't realize the impact that they have. It's something stupid now, but they don't realize the impact that they have, and eternally. And for me, I think it all almost come together. And this thing of teaching in the home language is something that I didn't, or your mother tongue, is something that I actually didn't. It's cool that we're speaking about this, because think of, especially Stefan, when you, and I'm not sure if you studied obviously in English or Afrikaans. I think you can have both languages.
Yeah, listen, that's going to be a tough example because it's very tricky. Classes in Afrikaans, but textbooks were in English,
Okay,
so you actually sort
well,
of
that's a
blend it,
that's a good example, because that's an issue. Because now constantly you need to apply. So you're learning, the formulas and
It does make it
whatever you guys-
difficult.
It makes it difficult, because now you read something and a term. Now you need to go and see, yes, but what does this mean?
Yeah.
I don't have it's not the
Well, to
same.
be
It's
fair,
like
that
reading the
happened a lot.
Bible in Afrikaans and English. It's
Yeah.
difficult. I just switched to go to English because the Afrikaans terminology is just throwing me off a little bit. So, and it's not to say, but you get my point. It's just constantly understanding. So that's switching. So, and listen, I don't know how that's going to work.
but on the educational system, right? Because I mean, this is, listen, to be fair, I think it's been a topic that's been discussed a lot, over the past X amount of years, right? And I mean, it's made headlines, and I mean, there's been a lot of aggravated people on this, right?
Yeah.
What makes this one tricky is I think everybody agrees that, listen, we need to sort this out.
Yes.
But
The fundamental question is, because I don't want to hammer on why are we here, right? Because I don't want to say that it's a moot point, but it doesn't necessarily, unless you have a different point of view, it doesn't necessarily solve for the problem. But how do we, in a really short period of time, solve for this educational challenge? You get what I'm saying? Because we, and I mean, leveraging this question on the quote, that you gave from Obama, I mean, that's powerful. That's really, really powerful. I don't know what the time frame is on that, whether it's a decade or 2 or 3 or maybe 5 years. But surely, if you think about the action of out-educating, let's say another country, right? And outperforming them in the future.
Yeah.
That is something attached to that is hard work and commitment. That's how you out-educate, right? It's not like there's, and again, more than willing to be wrong here, right? But it's not like there's something complicated to that. Like really put energy, action, intent, pure intent, right, behind education, and start actually driving that with the commitment to actually out-educate other nations.
Yeah.
Question being, how do we do that? Do you think?
Yeah. Look, there's a few layers to this. Number one, the teachers that you're talking about, there's people that do teaching because it's a job, because they need money
Sure.
to feed their family. It's not a calling for some
about
people.
most of them.
Right? Probably, right? I think you might be right there. But you find people that are in the teaching profession that don't have the temperament, the personality, the patience, and the ability to connect with a child, a way a child needs to be built and nurtured and taught. So those people do more harm than good to a child, not just academically, but to their self-confidence, to their psyche, and their ability to grow. So I think one of the issues is having the right people in the profession to do the profession, because it's a calling. So that
Agreed.
I fundamentally believe that, right? Now, it doesn't mean that let's get rid of all the others, because it's not constitutional and other things, and there's unions and rights, etc. So what do we do to deal with that? And my ideas are the following. In the future that we spoke about earlier, I see there being a class assistance that's very fluent in Sesotho, in Sezulu, in Xhosa, teaching kids language, teaching kids maths, teaching kids data science, teaching kids all these competency, and that person will not be a human being. I believe that the person that will do teaching, because why? All the reasons I've mentioned about human flaws, human issues, if the
So the
trajectory
emotion
of
is out
society
because
is
of it,
good,
yeah.
then that means the direction of travel will say, These are the things that have historically hindered progress. So let's remove these and replace them with something that is more neutral.
What do
That
you think
doesn't
is
have
the time
biases.
frame?
Look, when I say the future, I mean it's a long time, but let me come back closer.
sure.
Yeah. So to come back closer, I think a few things need to happen, right? I think number one, we need to have a mindset of winning. And when I say winning,
I agree.
you want to be number one in whatever it is you do. Right, like I'm a very
I
competitive
agree,
person.
man.
Right? Like
I
I think
agree.
you guys do sports. You
Yeah.
you watch rugby. You
No, we
watch
all-
the box.
then
Punish the
we've
All
got
Blacks,
three
you go,
competitors
yay,
here.
right? So in any, I like there's a book called No Rules by a guy called Reed Hastings. He's the founder of Netflix. He co-authored this lady called Erin Mayer. He said that when they hire their teams, they don't treat their colleagues as family members. They treat them as professional athletes. A professional athlete is disciplined about waking up, knowing their skill, knowing their talent, understanding their weaknesses, being coachable. Now, being coachable requires a certain level of humility.
Yeah,
In
sure.
education, kids that listen, that understand, that are coachable or teachable need to show up with a certain attitude. And that attitude, in my mind, a lot of it starts with home, with grooming, parents, values, things that parents teach children so that they can show up in a classroom being coachable or teachable and respect the person that is giving the instruction, but also confident enough to challenge and ask probing questions without that thing retaliating in a way that says, you're a child, you don't know nothing.
Yeah,
Got
Shut
you.
up.
yeah.
Got
So
you.
the human being involved,
Yeah.
it deals with those human issues, but we have humans. How do we manage that? Find a way to coach teachers to literally induct them into the education profession, work. There are many bodies, professionals, associations, and civil service organizations that can say, we see these issues in the education sector. This person is an expert in CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. These teachers have issues that they haven't dealt with. Let's take them through a program. We'll assign them therapists, maybe group therapists, and they'll deal with the human issue so that when the teacher shows up in class, that teacher
that's
doesn't
out.
bring
Yeah.
their baggage, their trauma, and hurt a child.
And
That's
no,
a problem.
And for
can be
that to
dealt with.
happen in our country, it's if I can just think of the restructuring of whatever you're talking about, because it makes sense.
It needs will.
Listen, on the
Look,
on
it
the on
needs
the
will.
on the performance side, that's how we run our companies.
Yeah.
It's literally that's a first principle for me, almost that that you go towards, almost with the education side of what Barack Obama said.
Yeah.
So it's we don't talk on a topic if we did not, educate ourselves in some hours of it. I'll rather say, listen, I don't know anything about this. I'm not going to talk about this.
Yeah.
I can say my opinion about what I think, but
Yeah.
if we start talking about AI models and all of that stuff, I'm going to tell you, okay,
Okay.
let me first
We'll
go
bring the
educate
CTO in.
myself a little
Yeah.
bit, and then we can talk about it. But for me, it's a thing of, and that's why I say, and I love it when you said the winning mindset,
Yeah.
because that's something we don't have. I said that, listen, and this is
As
for
a
me,
country,
Well,
as a country,
at least we
as
beat
a-
the All
Yeah.
Blacks, right?
we beat the All Blacks.
The rugby world champions.
Listen, and that was a proper
The
game. I must
athletics
say.
didn't go so well.
No, that was a
Let's not
proper
talk
game.
about Bafana, but
But for me, and I'll use this example. The first time I put my foot in the United States soil, the janitor that was cleaning, the sidewalk, were busy there out. It was the hotels outside, and it was a little bit wet, and I walked past there. And the amount of confidence he told me not to walk there. I need to check because he's busy cleaning. Just the authority, not the authority maybe, that's maybe the wrong word, but the surety he spoke out of was, I stood there, I'm like, yes, I'm not used to this.
Yeah.
Of this oak telling me he knew, that's his spot, he's cleaning there, don't walk here, just walk there. And it wasn't out of a, listen, I'm looking down on you, this is just, he's walking there, this is what I know this is my cleaning side, that shook me, because we don't have that.
Yeah.
We don't have that, and that's, listen, the States is always the big dreamers. They believe everything's possible, the American dream, all
They're
of
the
that.
center of the world
But
and the
they
universe.
created
Yeah.
that. That's a mindset that was created, that anything is possible. Anything is
American
possible
dream.
the American dream, America sold the American dream to every single individual, to the Indians.
They've got great PR. Hollywood is one of their biggest PR
You
machines.
get
and
my
they
point.
do it well.
So they sold that American dream to everybody, to Europe, that was what they sold, and they attracted a lot of people trying to make the American dream there.
Yeah.
But that's almost like that's something like the winning mindset. That's one thing for me. If we can just establish the winning mindset, the humility to learn, only those two for me would make a huge difference.
Yeah.
If our country get together in the sense of our president from the top obviously down, starting to implement this, and I don't say programs or whatever they want to put in place for us as a nation to say, this is what we're working towards for the next 20 years. This is where we understand this is not going to happen.
Yeah.
But let's as a nation, and then obviously there should be a lot of things assisting us as a nation. And like labor laws, you
Yeah.
touched on unions. That's blocking some of those stuff.
Yeah.
Our tax laws is blocking that. It's blocking foreign investors.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that
It's
we
heartbreaking.
can. It's
It's
heartbreaking
heartbreaking.
because our country's not set up for the South African dream or the African dream because it's going to happen.
Do you agree with this though? Because I mean, there's a lot going on.
This is opinion.
There. Yeah, no,
This is DáNiel Nel's opinion.
Yeah.
It's not to say that I want to force.
Daniel, I think I hear you.
I don't want to force something.
No,
on
but
you,
that's what I'm saying. So sorry, I hope that's not an unfair question because I mean, I
I've
don't
got a
expect you to
view.
agree with everything.
I've got a
right?
view, but I'll contribute. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, so maybe I
it's
think if
okay.
you could share your thoughts on that, because
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's a lot going on there, and I certainly think there's a lot of valuable sort of stuff there to actually unpack, right?
Yeah.
And specifically alluding towards foreign investment, right?
Yeah. So let's go back to the land of the free, America, right? America's success today is as a result of immigration. America is successful today because many people from different diverse countries
Came to
went there and applied their trade because the PR brought them there, the money brought them there, and all the things that make them successful, right? So they've done a great job in that regard. And by the way, America itself obviously is made up of people that escaped a particular regime. They were part of the UK, they were part of
Rebels.
all these different. So they set up something that they believed this is the best part of who we are.
Yeah.
And let's make it the dream that we aspire for, knowing what bad looks like where we come from, right?
Yeah.
What I do admire about the Americans, to your janitor, they are very patriotic.
Yes.
If you look at their cars, you look at their bumper sticker. I mean, like you, I was in the States a while back, been to New York, Washington, San Fran, like a few cities I've been to in the States. You see how proud Americans are of their country because of its dominance, because of its winning mentality, because of what it's done for its people. Obviously, you've got issues here and there of racism and
Yeah.
police brutality. No country's perfect, including this one.
Yeah.
But American people, you sooner to find people sitting like this, one of them will at least have a lapel with a flag.
Yeah.
None of us are wearing a flag.
South
right?
African, yeah.
And my view on why that's the case is because since 94, actually, when 94 happened, a promise was made to this country's people, and that promise wasn't entirely kept. When we spoke about trust and relationship building a while back, when you've got an issue where trust is betrayed, you create resentment. Our country defeated the apartheid system using violence, unfortunately, in some respects. But you see a lot of that violence happening in Cape Town with the taxi drivers. You see it happening with the protests that are so violent. I think our people have seen how violence was used to topple a regime that was oppressive. They're using that violence to express unhappiness to
I get you.
a regime that's supposed to represent them. So how can I, with this regime that hasn't kept its promise, that's not, look, people look like me that are running it, but they don't have my best interests.
I get
So
you.
why would I be proud of that? Number one. And number two, Nelson Mandela speaks about sports as a unifying thing. We see it with the Bucks. They won world
No, that's
champions.
it.
Banyana
That's
did us so
definitely.
proud in New Zealand, Australia with the World Cup and what they did to show the boys how it's done. So there's a lot of things that we can be proud of in other anecdote, but if you look at it holistically, we talk about weighted average, different categories of what makes a country run. If you weight that average and then you say the output is X, is that X something that I'm proud of? Today, I can't say I'm entirely proud of it, but you know what? I've got skills, I've got ideas, I've got things that I can contribute to certain aspects of components of this weighted average that can help at least improve the weighted average.
I
So
get
am I proud of this country and our progress we made? in some respects, yes, absolutely. I wouldn't be here without BEE,
Yeah,
for
yeah,
example.
yeah.
Many black businesses wouldn't succeed without BEE. But can we do better? We should. We know better. And I don't, this may sound a bit controversial, but I don't blame our current leaders in some respects for doing what they are doing because their background, their history, where they come from, they just don't know better, right? So they can't do better. So there's a condition there that affects them that ultimately feeds into the nation and saying, we are corrupt, we don't deserve to be in BRICS. We like, the village cousin of all these sort of global bodies and associations. It's like, it's disappointing, but there's an element of self-hate.
I get you.
And disappointment and things that make us feel less than. When I went to the UK I've lived there a few times, but when I went there, you find people that are like, we didn't know that a South African can head up a whole business unit in a big international institution. Wow, there's a South African there. And you see big institutions that are headed up by South Africans. It's like, really? South Africans do that? Amidst all this, scumbaggery happening here? So I think our nation has a lot of healing to do and reconciliation that needs to be done of what we are capable of. And it'll take certain individuals to push that and a certain level of patience we need to have. I'll say, I'm a Christian, I have Christian values, you have to forgive. There's things that we need to do. But in forgiveness, you can't do it and not do actions.
Anything, yeah.
You have to
The actions
forgive.
need to follow.
But actions speak louder than words. You gotta do things that show that, you know what, there's what's this thing? Meeting of minds. And I gotta step to meet you. I can't just say, I wanna meet you, osmosis.
I want to
100%.
I want to touch on something, right, please, because again, I think this is extremely relevant, right? And that is the portion where you mentioned that you believe our country's got a lot of healing to do, right?
Yes,
and
absolutely.
And I think everybody agrees, to be really honest. The thing is, and I'm going to try and phrase this the best way that I can, it's this constant to and fro of backwards, forwards. You get what I'm saying? Because it's like we're shifting our focus towards the healing part, and it's difficult because it needs to happen. But how does that fit into moving forward? You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And what does healing look like? What does that actually mean? And I want to put a bit of a extension to that. How do we actually heal? You get what I'm saying? And that's what I'm saying. I'm trying to phrase this right, because all of us agree this needs to happen. But how do we actually do it?
Yeah.
Because we can't sit here in another 60 years and say again, our country needs healing. And if it takes 60 years, then it takes 60 years, right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to put a time to it. What I'm trying to say is, at some point, we need to say, okay, but how do we heal? Because otherwise, that's going to be a key focus point. Ultimately, here's, if I can put what shall I say, a Euphoria solution. Ultimately, everybody wants the country to heal so that we're healed and that we can move.
Yeah.
You get what I'm saying?
Do you want to add something
Yeah,
there, Daniel?
and for me, to be honest, Thabo, I think there's a big group that feel exactly how the three of us feel here, especially the ones that establish their businesses in our country, that's sitting in key positions like yourself, that really that's over all these nonsense that's happening. It's almost like, listen, guys, can we forgive whatever, or not even to say we listen, we forgive. We all, both me and Stefan, and the three of us are Christian, and that we believe in forgiveness.
Yeah.
And yes, that's our hearts, and we forgave. Me and Stefan had numerous discussions around this. Listen, what happened into our country, and we didn't have influence in whatever happened. We're the byproduct of maybe our grandfathers or whatever. But we didn't have any intent with what happened in our country. Yeah. And what we want to do is we do understand the principle of what we cannot do anything what happened. But what we can do is we can have influence towards the future.
Yeah.
And we can have conversations like this to say, listen, but okay, how? And that's exactly what we're doing here is how do we do it? And I believe, and this is the reason for us, doing this podcast, is to enable the people to either reach out to us and speak to us, or to say, okay, but listen, I've got a good idea. And to challenge, because I believe there's a big part of South Africa and especially young professionals, that feel exactly the same way. Because the ones that doesn't feel this way is not in our country anymore. They
Yeah,
building.
they've left.
They set up the corporate structures and everything in London and all that
Yeah.
stuff. So the thing is, and we're calling them to come back. Me and Stefan, that's our first.
That's your first program
episode.
It caused
We-
havoc.
Yeah.
Just
It
so
caused
that
a
you
lot
know.
of havoc.
Look, it is what it is. It's your
I've got
views.
a lot of some of my best mates are living overseas.
But listen,
And-
it struck a chord. I sent Daniel. Daniel said this: "We're pinching nerves, brother. We're pinching nerves."
That's it. It's the South Africa. Listen, and I'm not going to go into
Yeah.
the rude stuff that we said there, but the matter is, it's left to us. I'm not going anywhere. Yes, we're building international businesses. You've
Yeah.
been international, but you're
Yeah.
sitting here. You
Yeah.
applied. Obviously, you learned a lot overseas.
Yeah.
Applying that knowledge and the thing is, we're not against going overseas, but yes,
Yeah.
just come back. Look like what's it, Rob Bursoff. I think it was 20 years. I'm not sure. I can be incorrect on my numbers there, but he was a
Yeah.
majority of his time. He was overseas, and now he's coming back because
Yeah.
of the love of the country. And maybe it wasn't his pure intent, but the thing is, it's applying whatever you learned to bring it back to our country to build this country. Because
Yeah.
obviously, we
More than
wanna-
happy with that.
We want to. Let's say.
No, more than happy with
Yeah.
that. Go and learn. Yeah,
Listen,
sure.
yeah.
We can bring that back.
Yeah.
Bring it back. Let's build the country. Let's have all these nonsense that happened. Put it behind us.
Yes.
Let's work towards a unified future.
Look, I think
A quick comment on the healing.
there's a very
because
important thing, right? So I'm into hip hop, so I like hip hop music. So there's a very famous
You and me both.
hip hop artist called Sean Carter or Jay-Z.
Jay-Z.
In his album 444, there's one song where he has a line where he says, "You can't heal what you haven't revealed." So before anything gets healed, it needs to come to the surface, to the attention of the
need to see
patient
it.
or the doctor or whoever needs to attend to that pain or that suffering to be remedied. So as a nation, I'll say we had a pilot of healing, a pilot test with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, right, or the TRC. That was a pilot to say, here are victims, here are perpetrators that went through pain and apartheid, and here they are having a conversation, and people are owning up to hurting, killing, doing all sorts of atrocious things to other human beings. And that was done for the nation to see. So to me, that was like a very nice pilot test of what healing could look like. Now, take that pilot and then you say, we've done this pilot, the nation has healed. That is a lie.
Yeah.
Right? We all know that. So to say the TRC was supposed to be the silver bullet for the nation and we are now a rainbow nation that's all happy, dancing, kumbaya, that is a lie. Right?
I agree.
It's not a malicious lie because the TRC was well-meaning in its intent, but its scale was ineffective because
Yeah.
it didn't reach everyone.
Well-
And even the people that were in the TRC, some of them were insincere. Maybe some of them did it for selfish reasons
I
because they
get
didn't want to
you.
go to jail. You know, some of the black families went there that lost loved ones and they're like, I just want to see this person, but I'm not going to forgive him. God will forgive him. You know, like those things happen because it's human nature. But the healing piece in my mind comes with different hats. Number one, there's the victim and then there's the perpetrator, right? The person that felt the crime understands the crime in their context and they live the pain. If you think about it's Women's Month, women go through a lot of pain. If you think about someone that was sexually abused, they live through a lot of trauma that they carry. The perpetrator has done the crime. They're probably moving on. If it's a rape, then that person's not well. So they're probably looking for other women to take advantage of, right? But it's a very sensitive example, and I'm using that for a reason because you've got a perpetrator and a victim. Their lived realities are very different.
Different from each
Their
other.
privilege is very different. Many women have rights that were raped to say this person should be killed, right?
Because that's what they
how
feel.
bad
That's
it
the
is.
pain. That's
It's an
the-
emotional
that's the
response.
fair value.
Many
Yeah.
women will say this guy raped me, but you know what? He didn't know better. I'll forgive him. Like there's
I
people.
get you.
People deal with trauma differently. This country has a lot of people that feel like not enough was done by the apartheid government to remedy, or not the apartheid government, but post 94, the black government to remedy the ills of the past. And what does that look like? If you think about, you own this business, right? This business is something that you built, hard work, your mind, sacrifices, boom. Next week, the president decides, you know what? All businesses that are owned by white people will be taken over by black people. Let's take that business and let's give it to black people. What happened to Zimbabwe and many other
Yeah, yeah,
countries,
yeah.
and you know
Yeah,
what
yeah,
the
yeah.
story is like there.
Yeah.
That was an evil act
Yeah.
that happened in apartheid. What I'm saying should happen to you or could happen to you if a president announced that. That's evil.
Yeah.
That is not good.
Yeah.
Right? So if something like that happened decades ago, that was this evil, what is it that needs to happen today to
I get
remedy
you.
that massive evil? I think the people that have perpetrated that, I mean, we're speaking about simple examples, but people that have done these crimes are dead, many of them. Many of them are not here, and they're not here to account for those crimes. Who's left? The children, the people that came afterwards. What is it that these children and descendants need to understand about what happened and the privilege they're sitting on now to remedy the pain that has been caused to the victims? I think there's questions that a lot of privileged white South Africans need to ask about. Yes, there is a lot of privilege we've earned. That privilege was through a lot of hard work, but a legislation was signed, stroke of a pen, to say that land, property, cattle, livestock, other things will be taken from people of a particular race because of that alone, and that was okay. But people acknowledging that and saying, we need to find a way. I know some people have said there's a wealth tax, a once-off tax, whatever. I think, in my mind, that should be an individual decision. I think it's a decision that someone needs to. It's hard to say it's an individual decision because you talk about people that have a diversity of views. Some people will say the government is taxing me, I'm doing a lot, I'm already doing enough, so I've already made up.
Yeah.
But some people will say, you know what? We are a nation of human beings. If I am a human being, that if I really do introspection and look at my privilege, a lot of it is because of the stuff that my grandparents did. And maybe that farm we have was as a result of land being taken away from some black families.
Yeah.
We have a few black workers in those farms and over there. How about we apportion a portion of the farm so that they can be co-owners and actually share the wealth with them? There's an Ipsos survey that was done, came out this month actually, globally. The biggest worry we have, South Africa is the biggest worry about this issue. It's unemployment. Why? Because that's livelihood, that's provision, that's health. To buy medicine, to afford education, like you need a job, you need to provide for your family. And the biggest group or demographic that is unemployed in this country is black people. Why? Because of what we're discussing now. Skills, job opportunities. A lot of it is historic. Yes, our government has done quite a lot to try and close the gap, but it's not enough.
No,
A
I
lot
agree,
needs to
100%. And tell me, because just to on the last topic, and I think we definitely want to go into some of the things, because me and Stefan said there's a lot that happened with all these, the land grabs and all these things that's happening now that they saying that we don't even understand, in the sense of, for instance, the land that was, let's say, for instance, taken by, we do understand that. But, for instance, the deepness of that, in the sense of, because it really comes down to, because I was part of, land that was taken from us back again after all these things.
Yeah.
Some of our land were taken.
Yeah.
But the negotiation part and the communication part were again like pinching nerves. So it was almost there to cause chaos. It wasn't there to say, because the way you explained it now to me makes a lot of sense. As a young boy, I didn't understand it that way. You get my point? In the sense of, okay, this is what needs to happen, because listen, my grandfather's not here now. To back
Ain't nobody here to ask him. Get
he's not yet the acting. But I promise you, if somebody come and negotiated with him and asking him, listen, this is what happened, this is the situation, can we take this part of the farm? I can almost guarantee, because I lived with listen, I didn't know my father until I was 14 years old. He worked hard. So when I woke up, he was already at work. When I go to sleep, he was already, or he was not at home. So I grew up with my granddad. And I knew that, like, not to say the hate that he had then for, these things. But I could see it didn't make sense for him. You get my point. And remember, that was his, view of where they come, and the perspective that they came out of. But I remember this one scene when we were driving, and he was, like, literally driving and saying, but it doesn't make sense. You get my point? In the sense of, it
can't make sense to him.
It was just, I could see, like, it was almost like he was taken for like a big ride.
Yeah.
For like it was taken for a fool.
Yeah.
But so to get to that, I think, because I think you must maybe elaborate a little bit more on that.
Yeah.
I would like to, dig it a little bit deeper, because that's the things people don't want to talk about.
So let me touch on that. To use your father.
And then there's another thing that I want to touch on again.
For him to drive after land was taken from his farm and feel that way, I can totally empathize with that. And why do I empathize with that? He was brought up by someone who passed things down.
Yeah.
Now, in a context like that, if I was to sort of try to play it out in my head, here's this young boy. He grew up on this property. He saw the crops, cattle, livestock, whatever, and then he worked hard with his dad to make this thing happen. In his mind, that's whole, like it's what he's exposed to. And then someone then comes in like, but Dad, we've worked so hard for this. Why are they taking this? And it's like, it's wrong. So he will feel the pain of loss and a miscarriage of justice because that's what they know. However, in that context, and history writers often get away with this. They don't write, they write their sins out. History writers write their sins out. So the history of that land or that farm, I don't think a lot of it is documented in a way that this child, who is now an adult, who feels pain or betrayal, like your dad or anyone, any white person that feels like if someone wants to take my land that I worked hard for, they're doing something wrong and it's actually reverse apartheid. I understand that view because that's the context. They weren't there at the time where families, black families, were kicked, killed, thrown out. They didn't witness the pain of another human being.
But it wasn't shown.
What I'm saying to you is that we are human beings and we know what pain and loss, we know what our dreams for our children are. We know what we want for our kids and for them to thrive. If you feel that a person's scale color determines this person's prosperity is more important than that person's prosperity, you back to animal farm, right? You back to principles that you wanna avoid. So therefore, what I'm saying is that that very same black family who got kicked out decades ago, they had dreams about their land.
And they had the same feeling as my father or my grandfather.
And now think about healing, and there's this reality now. How does this healing happen when the story there has been handed down to kids to say, this land, your ancestors are buried there, but it's not owned by us. Someone took it, and it's a spiritual connection.
Well,
right?
100%. And
so it's a real issue.
It's a big issue. But how would you say, obviously, we resolve for this? Because, listen, luckily we don't have so much of that farm ground anymore. But there's a lot of guys that do have that.
Yeah.
Can I tell you thoughts on this? Yeah.
So listen, I've been quiet because I've really been trying my utmost to digest this because I mean, it's a lot, to take in the sense that people really got hurt. People are still getting hurt, and I love what you said. And I love what you said with regards to us being first a nation of human beings.
Yes.
Because
first
there's something in there. I mean, I got some chills when you said that because it shifts a lot of perspective in this discussion. So with that being said, here's what I'm really concerned about is, can we solve for this matter without trying to solve a wrong with a wrong?
Yeah.
If you get what I'm saying in context, I think it's important because I'm not trying to say the one is, how do I put this? I'm not trying to say the one is not right because it's wrong. I hope that makes sense.
Two wrongs don't make a right.
Two wrongs don't make a right, but is that even wrong because, for example, land was taken, illegitimately, so that's the first thing I think. The second thing, so it's going to be three questions if I can remember the third one. The second thing is that, and I'm definitely not historically versed, well enough, but I'm going to try and explain this the best way that I can.
Yeah.
But where do we draw the line then, in terms of then doing that?
Yeah.
Because, for example, I'm not sure which of the I don't actually want to use Africa here as an example, but let's maybe use the US. Does the US then need to go through the same exercise with the Indians, if you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Maybe if you look to South Africans, to Africa, some of the nations that actually migrated south, right, that weren't here originally either.
Yeah.
Same principle applies, So how far back do we then go with this sort of correcting, if that is actually the intent? And then the third thing is, Sorry, I hope you. Yeah, what I'm
Yeah, I get your context.
But the third thing, and this is the one I think where a lot of people's minds are leading toward, but I know there's technicalities in terms of actually what ground is fruitful, whatever fruitful means. But isn't there enough land to actually do this without taking and giving? Isn't there enough land to actually give? And I'm really asking the question humbly, within state control.
Yeah,
Do you get what I'm saying?
I get what you're saying. So there's a few layers to what you're saying, right? The history of the world is very violent in every way you can think of. If you go to Asia, you look at the history of the Chinese. I mean, if you go to the museum and you think about what happened, let's say in the Ming Dynasty, and how they did a lot of work. Let me not say work, but they battled other tribes.
Yeah.
China's goal, the thing I admire about China is that they put the interests of the nation above the interest of the individual.
Okay.
And they're very big on our country needs this, so I will play my role to make the whole succeed, despite what that role is. I could be a janitor, I could be a scientist, I could be
I play
data
my part
scientist.
to contribute towards.
To them, even in the way they write the date, they start with the year, then the month, then the date. The West start with the date, the month, and the year. It's the individual, So
No,
if
I
you
get
think
you.
about the way of thinking and how they process things, they're always like this. And again, they're very proud. They have their lapel pins with their countries, right? So I digress. The history of society is violent because people took things from other people using force. The history today is still violent, but it's a different kind of violence. If you look at how countries like, let me not name countries, but there's hacking that happens. There's someone that invades a country, takes something, takes it elsewhere, and that gets used for an objective. That is violent because there is a breach of trust. There is something that was taken, there's loss, there's suffering, and then there's someone that's benefiting unfairly, right? So cybercrime, all these things are a perpetuation of a human condition that takes and inflicts violence. Now, to your question, let's go back to history because I was talking about the human condition, which has got its own issues. How far back do people go to, in America, they call it reparations, right? And it's a term that's used universally to say a certain group of people, mostly white people, have benefited as a result of slavery, as a result of these things. They need to show something to say that we benefited unfairly.
I get you.
And this unfairness has resulted in this amount of wealth. And here's this wealth. How much of this wealth do we give to say we are sorry as a gesture of goodwill? Who quantifies that? That is a hard question. Because, as you said, how far back do you go? Do you go back, you spoke about the Indians, or what they call Native Americans. How far back do you go? Maybe in the Native Americans, there were different tribes where they fought each other. In the same way, you're saying that in Africa, the Bantu people moved and they found the Khoi and they took their land. And then, do the Bantu people now have to, it's impossible because there's no data today to quantify that. So I think, in my mind, for reparations to take place, there needs to be an acknowledgement of there was evil that was done, there was violence inflicted. Let's start there and reveal the pain and then start to heal. The healing then, in my mind, the best way to do this is an individual that believes they have benefited, they should quantify what that is. Say, okay, I've benefited, and this is what I think is the amount. And then the person on the other side of the table, because it's a negotiation, will say, I think it's enough. Thank you. Shake hands, move on. Or say, actually, I've lost more than that because of ABC. I think I should get X or Y or Z, something that's different to the offer. But there should be a professional, independent coach, mediator person to say, guys, play nicely. He has offered something. This is what are the things you need today to help you make whole? And please, let's remove greed, selfishness, all these things. So a facilitation needs to happen, but someone needs to put an offer. The person on the other side needs to then say, this is enough, or it's not. But very professional, trained, I don't know if they exist, but someone in the middle needs to facilitate this negotiation in a way that makes sense. So for me to say, that's the government, that's whoever, I don't think even governments can do that because governments have people that are biased. I think there should be something like a UN body that's job, they've studied miscarriage of justice globally, and they've figured out the dynamics in each country, the nuances, and they can find an approach that they believe is fair, and then have bilateral discussions, have multilateral discussions, and find a way to find a bridge. It could happen that someone will say, white farmers need to compensate black South Africans with land. And someone will say, actually, did you know that there are people that are now living in the United Kingdom and the United States that were beneficiaries? How about the UK contribute to that and make the negotiation bigger with an offer that has a South African white farmer, a British beneficiary, an American beneficiary that benefited, and there is something that can be done, right? And a black South African will say, oh, great. And a Khoi will be like, well, I also lost some money and some land. And be like, okay, I got this, and I've got this negotiate. What's good for you, Mr. Khoisan, man? And then they negotiate, So I know I'm speaking very idealistically here, but there needs to be something that's put on the table, and it needs to be sincere. Back to the human thing I was saying. Like if I feel as a human being that snap, someone was hurt because of my ancestors, and this was wrong. What do I have that I can offer to extend an olive branch? That's a human decision that is made and said, sincerely, I'm sorry, and I think this is my offer to you. And if the person on the other side, greed aside and all those things, they see beyond the value of the offer, but they see the intent. In Christian philosophy, Christ speaks about how a person gives a lot of money and some lady gives a can of something. And he's like, that lady gave more than the guy that gave a lot of money because their heart is sincere. So if the heart of the person that is giving is truly sincere, hopefully the recipient sees that. And the conversation that happens there can build bridges that go beyond just the money to say, okay, extended it, etc. How do we now build together and share the wealth and share the knowledge and share all these things? So there's a big journey that needs to happen. How can that be facilitated? Who's involved? I don't know, but it needs will. I'll say political will because politics are there, but businesses can organize themselves, civil society can organize itself, churches, many bodies can play a role, but this is my best way of thinking about how something like that could be approached, Stefan. Does that make sense? Is there something that you want to challenge or add to that?
I think, listen, I think to move the conversation forward, we can move forward, but I'm definitely going to just maybe give a remark on it, right? Because I think there's, again, a lot of value in what you said. And to be really honest, I've got a lot of respect for the way that you phrased it, because again, it's a super difficult topic. And I mean, again, to digest it in this short amount of time, and give valuable comment isn't easy. Because I'll tell you, here's the thing. What I'm hearing makes sense, all right? The way that my mind works is it constantly gravitates towards solution, right?
Yeah.
And hearing what you're saying and seeing the value in your, I'm going to say, idealistic solution, right? Sort of referencing your statement, is that a solution also needs to be, you need to be able to implement it practically.
Yes.
And the first concern is to implement this practically, you're going to almost have to stop the economy.
Yeah.
And I say I'm saying I'm saying that very humbly because I mean just the time I think to actually do that and prove it and it becomes extremely difficult, So that's the first thing.
I think the hearts will change and within the process even.
Well, and not speaking against
Greed
it. The point that I'm trying to make is not speaking against it. What I'm trying to say is we're after a solution because, I mean, me and DáNiel said from the start.
Yeah.
We're here. We want to build. We want to make a difference. We want to find solutions. You get what I'm saying? And ultimately, I think good starting point again, but we need to be able to implement it, right? I'm not saying that it can't be implemented. I'm worried that if we even attempt to try and implement that it's going to take another 100 years, right? You get what I'm saying? All the damage that's being done whilst trying to do that is going to be, I don't want to say irreversible, but it becomes very difficult.
The alternative is violence.
Well, and that's what
I was thinking.
The alternative is violence.
It's I cannot see this playing out without some sort of violence.
Well, this is what I'm trying to get to, right?
To be honest, all South African hearts are not willing to sit in a conversation like this. That I can promise you. And the same with, let's say, Africans or South Africans.
Well, I'm going to be honest. Then they should start.
Yeah, well, that's the challenge. That's being the challenge.
I came here because I have a different view and life experience to you guys.
And that's super important.
Let me come and give my perspective to this conversation because maybe someone needs to hear it. Maybe you guys need to tell me things that I don't know. I'm aware that I have a lot of blind spots. Like, I don't come in this conversation saying I know it all.
Likewise.
Right? Like, all of us as human beings need to have that humility to say, you know what? If I learn something new, I need to be humble enough to know that I need to change my mind and my approach.
Yes.
And
No,
do better.
100%.
You know?
But if I can just finish my remarks, sorry.
Yes, sorry.
And it is, yeah, no, it's because I've really been trying to think, because I mean, I understand that we need to attend to this, but it is as difficult as we've been making, or at least trying to explain, right? And it's the following. Another concern is, I'm worried that if we just go down that route, or concerned rather, that the ultimate issue or the ultimate challenge I think that needs to be overcome is actually getting people that have been previously disadvantaged to also get, not to also, but to believe in themselves and to feel valuable and to have that winning mindset. And all of those, I don't want to call it the fluffy things, but really
Yeah.
sort of see their own value. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because ultimately, if what I'm hearing, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is if
Yeah.
you talk about retribution, in other words, something was done wrong here, now I, in inverted commas, require retribution or sacrifice or something being paid to make me, and I don't want to say feel better, but I mean, it is what has come up in the discussion. I'm worried that getting something physical is not going to actually attend to that problem.
No.
Do you,
I agree.
do you get the point? And
I agree.
yes, I'm so worried that I'm saying this badly, but you get the point that I'm trying to make.
I get your point, and I agree with you 100%. Some people, the pain was so big, no amount of money will fill that gap. So keep giving, keep giving, keep giving. And that in itself is scientifically incorrect, because you can't give in perpetuity to something that
Case
you
in
feel, you know.
point.
So I think for me there, Stefan, it's about, you know, a few things come into play there. Because you're human beings, there needs to be a human healing that needs to happen intrinsically with people that sit around a table and have a conversation. You know, I mean, for me personally, I've got a therapist, I've got a lady that I speak to about my childhood traumas, about my personal things that I struggled with. And she's given me the tools to process things. I mean, if I can give you an example, I went through something when I was in high school, and it was something that was traumatic to me. And when I went through this thing, you know, obviously life happened, you react, you get triggered and all those things. And when I mentioned some of the things with my therapist, she said, you know what, how about you write a letter to your younger self and say, how are you doing? What's happening? And you respond from that younger self of you to your adult self about the emotions you felt at the time and the trauma you experienced. And then you have this dialogue where you now process your individual pain as an adult so that you can deal it and understand it and then show up. When that trigger happens, you're no longer responding as a teenager. You're responding as a 30-something adult that's like, you know what? I've processed this pain, and now I'm in a stage where I can respond in a mature way. Now, if you think about that, for how many citizens we have in this country? Let's say 60 million plus people.
Plus minus.
Not many people have the awareness that they need to do that work for themselves. Not many people are equipped with the tools of dealing with themselves to a point where they know they need to self-optimize. And that lack of awareness creates a challenge where they will never feel, you know, I've got enough. Now, if you put them into now at South Africa with all these languages and our tribes, there's Zulus, there's Xhosas, the Sutus. Apartheid has done a great job in making us hate each other. Some Zulus and Sutus will be like, no, but you guys did this in the past. Like, I think the thing that is so evil about the history of this country and the world is that those divisions have created human conflict that is so unnecessary. And that conflict is perpetuated today because some of those stereotypes are passed on from generation to generation. And Stefan, look, I think you're right. To say, here's a water, I'm sorry, and then you receive it and you're like, your water's not enough. I want this. I want you to do 10 push-ups. I want you to do Comrades Marathon. Like
it will almost keep on going.
So that body that comes together with the globe, the world's best thinkers on how to do reparations and amendment and mediation and reconciliation, they need to find a formula that works for the different calibrations of problem solving, of unity. And it's hard to say that. Look, I'm speaking very idealistically, guys. And I know I said the alternative is violence because that's what we're seeing happen today. That's what we're seeing happen in countries in West Africa where young people feel like their government is betraying them and they have to topple the government. So, like, it's the history of the world, man. It's violent.
And for me, to be honest, with this whole topic going, and because we had one guy that spoke to us about, all the differences. It's not because, listen, coming from a white side of the conversation, we don't know the internal issues that there are.
Yeah.
We're only seeing and getting the white versus the blacks and, the apartheid, and this was wrong and all these. But we had a good conversation with one of our other friends, and he explained it to us to say, listen, but and you mentioned it now, that there's a lot of, disunity or a lot of violence between the cultures.
Yeah. Different tribalistic, and
specifically
it's a global issue.
Yeah. And but that's why I'm saying this whole black-white thing, it will, in a sense, let's say, listen, we want to work towards let's say South Africa where that could be eradicated, and I believe we need to work towards that. But we need to unite as a nation because there's other, violence or tribal issues internal as well. So, and that's maybe something that also needs to, obviously that's something that needs to be sorted out. But from a let's say from a black, white, tribal, because we don't have really tribal, just the,
even the Anglo-Boer War was very violent, but it was white on white violence,
but
right?
There's a lot of white on white violence. There's families. Boer families and farmers and all these oaks that got violence because of
that's why I say it's a
competition.
Human condition.
It's a human thing.
Regardless of race, religion, it's a human condition that needs an intervention that makes sense.
I truly believe, Thabo, that if we have something that the nation can believe in, and that's why I love the thing of the winner. That's something I'm going to keep with me, is to stir that winner mentality. And is to maybe drive that something, because we'll get to a place where we're going to start really driving some of these things. And taking, the parts that we discussed, especially conversations like this, and seeing where can we start implementing it. Obviously within our businesses and the reach that we have, exactly like you do your organization. So for me, it's clearly that there will be some parts where people want to stir and not have unity within a nation. Maybe Russia will come, or I don't know who, but some nation will come and try to, or the United States, I don't know. But some will come and try to, break this unity, because the more the people, because we do understand that the only way another nation comes in, or another party comes in, or new, whatever, a leader will come
or
in,
a dictator,
or whoever, they will try to bring for this chaos that we are in a solution. That's the only way how they're going to become in power, is they need to bring a solution for this chaos.
Well, that's destabilizing a nation.
Casing my point. So for me, it's, listen, we can see we are destabilized. And there's no unity. And we as a nation need to look further and see, listen, why are everybody after South Africa? We need to look past the issues that we as a nation do not see. But the other nations see the opportunity within South Africa, towards Africa.
That's how violence happens. And some people organize themselves. Even in the Shaka Ilembe, there are tribes that form alliances. And they're like, we will protect each other against that rival tribe. That's like black on black, but obviously tribalistic issues, right? But let's come back to the essence of some of the issues you're asking me, right? I think us in this room, we have different amounts of privilege. I think it's important that we document and write those. Like, it's nice to just say, I'm privileged because of X, Y, Z. There's a difference in thinking and conceptualizing it versus writing it down and actually seeing it, meditate on it, and say, I see my privilege. My privilege is that I went to a very good school, I'm good at X, Y, Z. The thing about reparation and doing good to other people doesn't always have to be money. It could be your time to say, you know what, I'm very good at this skill. As my way to show that I want to sort of give back for my ancestors' sins, I will go to that school there and teach them maths. And guess what? I will do anything I can to facilitate tools, knowledge, and things to make those kids their benefit. I think as a human being, knowing what you're good at, look, you could say money, but money is finite. Time is also finite, by the way. But you need to think about, how do you divide your privileges into things that you can contribute to make you feel like, you know what, I'm playing my part here. How about my fellow man and woman who's also privileged to say, let's come forward and make this thing better.
But I think you're leaning towards something that's very important here, right?
Yeah.
In terms of the whole looking forward perspective, right? Because let me give an alternative to not an alternative, but something that is practically maybe more implementable, right?
Yeah.
And that is, again, let me give a euphoric picture, right? Let's say we triple the GDP.
Yeah.
Crazy, right? 50 years. Let's say we triple the GDP.
Yeah. 10x that GDP, actually.
Listen, I'd love to. I thought I was going to aim low, but the fact that you shouldn't for the moon, that's 10x, right?
I'm a capitalist, so...
But I mean, I agree, all right? So
yeah.
let's say we 10x the GDP. So
Yeah.
in 40 years or whatever the time frame is, we're sitting at a $4 trillion GDP. You know, and let's say, I don't know what do you call it, how many people will be in South Africa back then, but I mean, it will have, but I mean, it will have an exponential effect on the GDP per capita.
Yes.
And inclusion and actually growing forward and saying, listen, all of these things in terms of reparation, we're going to try and find the solution with regards to that. Because as we've now discussed for the past 30 minutes, it's super complicated, right?
Future skills are very important in that, by the way.
Sorry?
Because future skills are important in that because you can get a machine to do the job of 10 people that outsources its skill to another country and it pays 10x of one person, and that value that comes is shared amongst few people. That GDP per capita number could fundamentally change. You could find a way to exploit the skills and the lived experience of South Africans to create something that is so unique in value that the world needs it. And that doesn't always need to be humans. It can be machines. It can be, obviously we need to deal with how we do that, but I think there's a way to think about 10xing the country that doesn't involve us, warm bodies. We need to think about ways of doing that in a way that the world needs it, but it gives value. And it needs us to be skilled, to be sure in our value. But not only that, we need to understand other nations very well too. Travel there. I'm not like traveling, but traveling has been,
it's a super
beyond the
important
textbook and learning, has been one of the most experiential learning experiences of my life because it made me understand my problems, other people. And when I speak to people about a lived experience, I can speak with conviction. I can say, we'll develop an algorithm here that solves that problem in that country because I've been there and I know their pain points and this is valuable to them. And guess what? We have the skill, they don't. Let's do that. Value comes in, we grow the country, we create value, and we are a competitive force to be reckoned with. And we do what? We win.
Yeah.
And
that's what we've been driving a lot because we own a media business. That we really after talent in specifically townships, because we believe that there's a lot of talent that's going to come out of our townships.
Townships and villages, by the way.
Townships
People
and the
forget
village.
about the
villages.
dusty rural village.
No, so because we had a stat of the guys in Nigeria that's in the rural areas of Nigeria, they've got a weak link, but they've got a laptop that they can code on. They build crazy stuff.
Yeah.
And there's not one moment that somebody's going to convince me that we don't sit with that talent.
Yeah. The next Satya Nadella sitting there.
Yeah.
Right? In some dusty
100%.
village,
But they need to be enabled.
Yeah.
They need to be able.
Opportunities
That's
need to
it.
be given. Yeah.
And let's say the opportunity, but the willingness to take, because if they can do it in Nigeria on a weak link on a basic PC or
it's
laptop,
missing a keyboard or a thing, right?
I don't want to go into details with that, but I saw it. And the thing is,
They're hungry, man.
They're hungry because they realized it's communities. The guys there in the tech guys, they realized, listen, but we know this. This is something that we don't need to travel all over the world. We can do it from here.
Can I pause you for a second?
Yeah.
I actually interrupted Stefan when he was speaking. So let me come back to you because you were saying something and I came with this thing because in my mind I just thought I should just share it. But yes, I want to apologize for that also.
I'm just going to stick here.
Yes, I'm just saying I'm also giving an olive branch for my reparation of interrupting you, Stefan. So please.
No, listen, to be fair, I mean, I think you guys are going on a good tangent, right?
Yeah.
That's why I just sat back. Listen, ultimately what I was just trying to say in short is, with regards to the retrospective view, right? There's always there's also the forward view, and that's what I was saying in terms of actually, okay, listen, we can try and solve for that matter, looking backwards, right? And I mean, you referenced, I don't want to go to that, sorry. But there's also the forward view that says, listen, okay, a common goal that we can 100% as South Africans, beyond the shadow of a doubt, agree on is, I think everybody wants the GDP to 10x or 4x or
Yeah.
whatever number it is. Like, there's no debate here. There's
Yeah.
no discussion that we actually need to have about this.
Nope.
Everybody wants this So immediately, at least in terms of the discourse and the challenges with regards to implementing getting the people in the room, etc.,
Yeah.
which we can still try and do if that is the solution, right? This is something that immediately brings people together.
Yeah.
And then the question becomes, okay, if this is now a common goal that immediately aligns people and it brings unity, how do we now actually do that? Because like you said, with technology and with all of the things that are actually happening that are exponential in its nature in the world at the moment, South Africa does have the opportunity to actually 4x or 10x or whatever the case may be its GDP. I'm not sure if that's a realistic statement. I'm just putting it out there because, listen, we have to do it.
Got a dream, man.
And I'll put it to you this way, right? If we don't do it, here's where I think the alternative is very bad.
Yeah.
Because that ultimately is the best alternative. If we can 10x the GDP and distribute all of that revenue, right, fairly, and we can define what fair means, right?
Yeah.
That immediately solves for the problem, does it not? I'm asking. I'm
To
not
a
making
certain
a
extent,
statement.
let me answer your question directly, because does
want
it
to
solve the
also make a
problem or
comment
not?
on that.
Now, it depends. So we're talking about 10xing, using machines, etc. Remember, South Africans are mostly concerned about what? Unemployment. Ipsos survey just came out, August fact. Now, if you say, this is the company that will be responsible for doing this thing, who are the owners of that company and who are the beneficiaries of that company? Right? Who are the people that are doing the work to effect the change and the value, that economic value that is needed? Look, I agree with you. No one goes to the World Cup to lose. No one goes to any tournament to lose. We want to go somewhere and win and make our country proud and make our families proud, because ultimately our families are the reasons we're here. But you want to make sure that when you 10x the economy, who are the participants there? Is that system done in a framework that enables equitable access to opportunities? Is there a system that enables learning and knowledge transfer that says, no, this group of people are doing too much here. We need a diversity of people that know the skill, but it's not a representation of our demographics. Let's bring people here to be able to share the wealth as we 10x the economy, so that some people will be like, not only those people are moving forward and getting 10x benefits, we sitting here still, and it's going to do what? Violence,
That's it.
envy, human condition, lack.
it just widens the gap
and it's going to
again.
widen the gap again, and it's back to square one.
But hold on, because I'm sorry, I'm going to probe you on this, because
Yeah.
it doesn't help that we reach a stalemate with, on both sides of the pendulum, if you get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Because it can't be, listen, if we look retrospectively, we can't practically implement this.
Yes.
Right? Because it's going to take too long, or whatever the reason is. Now we say we look forward and we say, okay, if we 10x the GDP, this will work. Then you say,
Yeah.
okay, no, but that's not going to work, because then this is going to be
I'm
the
not saying
challenge.
that's not going to work per se, though. I'm saying that can work. It can work in a way. Let's use a practical example, right? Our country's GDP is driven by different sectors. You've got the financial sector, which is one of the best in the world. You've got mining. You've got various healthcare and so forth, because we know a lot of people come here for healthcare. So it's to say, okay, who are the participants here? Who's involved here? What is the demographic of this group of people? Is this an inclusive demographic? And that in itself is a question that is probing to say the status quo we know is not working. How do we now change, let's say, financial sector, right? Financial sector has these institutions, it's got banks, insurance, asset managers, all these instruments of change, etc. What is it that they're doing to make sure that within themselves they are, I'll use the word transformed because that's a colloquial term, but I don't really like the word transformed, because many people have taken that, I don't know if I can say bastardized, but they've taken transformation and they've made it something that's such an evil thing, whereas its intention was actually meant to say, transformation says that here's a situation, it's not good, let's change it into an ideal situation, which is this. Whether we'll get to the ideal or not, I don't have the answers to that. In my lifetime, will we get to an ideal? I doubt it. But I hope in my grandchildren's time, there's going to be a period where things are much better than what they are now. But we need to plant the seeds today and do the work today to make sure that our children learn and understand that for this world and this country to succeed, it requires all of us to do it together. It requires you to understand that person to understand that person, to go to their homes, to go where they come from and see their lived experience and say, I've seen how that person lives and I don't think that's good enough and I don't think I'd want to live there. But what can I do to help that person suffer less and to get a better life that's at least close to what I know?
So I agree with what you're saying, right? But I want to probe you on something because
Yeah.
that's a difficulty, I think, in this.
Yeah.
And it is, and honestly, it's from an understanding perspective, is you referenced, okay, so we increase the GDP, right, at this layer. But then it's a question of actually providing access to everybody in an equitable manner.
Economic participation.
Okay, so could you unpack that a bit? Like, what does that actually mean?
Yeah.
Because there's this difficulty, and please correct me if I'm wrong, with regards to you provide X amount of value and then you receive X amount of remuneration, for lack of a better term, if I can just use that, as opposed to distribution, right?
Yeah.
Just based on the fact that you're here, you get something.
Yeah,
right?
we're not socialist. I don't believe in socialism.
Yeah, but this is what I'm trying. Can you unpack that? But maybe how does that actually look in your view? So we grow the GDP 10x.
Yeah.
How do we provide access to that as a nation in an equitable manner? What does that What does that mean?
Yeah. So historically, and I'll use myself as an example, right? In my family, I was the first person to get a university degree, right? Fact, right? In my nuclear family. And, so you take that and you go, the life that I'm living versus my parents and their ancestors is very different. And my contribution in the spaces that I'm in is very different in that it adds a kind of value that's appreciated, that's quantified today, right? Look, in many cultures, many religions, many households, there's things that they value that are so intrinsic that money can't buy. But I come to your question around how do we do that? Because if you look at skills globally, there's discrimination in skills. There's discrimination in remuneration for contribution of those skills. Someone can be a great janitor, but they'll make nowhere near what a CEO of a tech company can make. The Gini coefficient there is very, very high. So you say, what are the demographics of people of a skill set of a low contribution job? What are the skill set of a contribution of the people that are in the high contribution job? How do we then work a journey to say, okay, let's find a way over time to ensure that there is equitable access to education institutions, to skills development, to mentorship, to saying, okay, you've been educated, you've got a job, great. Now your company needs to be part of the supply chain of that corporate day. Guess what? I don't know how to run a business. I don't know how to balance my books. I can't write these documents, register a company and meet your procurement standards, Mr. Big Corporate. How do I do that? So there's some work that needs to be done to bring a whole avalanche of people that are ill-equipped to get into the formal economy, which is where their value mostly is. So some piece of work, for me, it starts with education, dude. Like, I'm an advocate for education and I'm very passionate about it because, and when I say education, Stefan and DáNiel, like it's about education is academic education where you're excellent academically and you're able to apply yourself technically. But education is learning how to coexist with other people especially people that are different to you. So the school that I went to a multiracial school. When I went to that school, it was the first time I was in an environment with, it's high school with white people. I got to see what privilege looks like. That was very different to my privilege. I got to see, my mom made me great biscuits and she's got the greatest, baking abilities. You go to school, you got a kid that's a big tuck box full of noodles, full of chocolates, full of these things, just like snap. This is different to what my good is.
I get you.
So education that exposes you to how different life is outside of your comfort zone, in my view, is much more valuable than straight A's.
Yeah.
And that's why you've got kids that didn't do well, that went to Model C schools. Academically, they got their 50s, 60s, whatever, and they're working abroad in other countries and they're successful because they've learned how to impress a white person that gave them opportunities, that sent them abroad to get a secondment that they would have otherwise not had if they went to a township school. They barely struggling to put an English sentence together. So how can that manager recognize them to give them an opportunity to go abroad? And that's the majority of this country.
Well, and that... Yeah, you can go.
Sorry, because I want to put something to you on this, right? Because, I mean, we've been on the gravy train of education now for a bit, but listen, it's the reality. Right?
Yeah.
So I want to put something to you, right? And it's, It's totally crazy.
Okay, crazy is good.
I'm serious. It's totally crazy. But I mean, we're talking about 10xing the GDP. So let's just, I mean,
Yeah.
we're there in the discussion. And the reason why I'm putting it to you is because, listen, if we're going to solve for these problems in our lifetime, right? Big problems need big solutions. That's
Yeah.
just the name of the game. You know,
Yeah.
we can't keep playing small with these types of
Exactly.
problems.
Disruptive changes, not marginal.
Yeah.
We need, like,
So here's the question, right? There's a church in China, right? I'm not sure if it seats 300,000 or 1 million people, but it's somewhere between the two, right?
massive.
It's
It's a mega
massive.
church.
But that's mega, right?
China's term mega is like,
Sure, right? So we should maybe just go and fact check the stat, right? But it's something of the sort. Okay?
yeah.
So, what do you think about, or is it possible, or even plausible, to raise? Listen, I'm going to put a figure out there to get it out there because this might be something, right? To raise 50 billion rand, or let's say 50 billion rand, right? And go and build education schools, right? That can actually put 300,000 people in and use technology, etc., to get people educated really quickly.
Yes.
I mean, crazy idea.
Yeah.
How plausible do you think that that is? And yeah, what's your thoughts on that? Because it's nuts. But I
Yeah.
mean, here's the challenge.
Yeah.
Listen,
You
we
wanna
need to
add
do
to that?
something.
Yeah.
So keep your thoughts on that. So I know of a couple of oaks in our country that's busy with that. And I think actually they close to 3 billion.
But
Already.
building that size of educational
Not
facility,
that size.
Because this is my
in
point.
different, so
Yeah.
Yeah.
there is definitely a drive towards that.
Yeah.
Towards, that I think just the scale of what we think, and just on the comment and what you said earlier, the thing is, I don't think our country understand the importance of what you just said now on the level and the, what is good for you and what is good for me and what is good for somebody else is not the same. Fast for you and fast for me could be different.
Yeah,
I
it's
was a pro
different.
athlete back in the day.
Yeah.
So fast for me is being top, let's say 3 in our country. Fast for you would be maybe, getting towards
Finishing
this
100
is not-
meters
I'm
in
just
20
making an
seconds.
example.
Yeah.
So that's the importance of travel. Because good in our country and what we're doing good,
Yeah.
we see the level of excellence. Going to Europe, you see a different level of excellence.
Yeah.
Going to China, you see a total other different, level of
If you
excellence.
see the martial arts they do in Korea
And-
versus
and-
what we do here.
But that casing the point. So if we as a nation can understand that what we think is good, how we run our country,
Yeah.
how we do things, we need to be and it want to take me almost back to how far behind we are
Yeah.
on upskilling
Yeah.
ourselves and
Yeah.
just putting the stamp on the whole thing of education and putting the perspective in our, because the thing is, if and we're going to I don't know when, but within the next 4 weeks or 5 weeks, we're just busy with the security thing. But we're going into some townships and we're going to start speaking to some people, but deep into, maybe Soweto or wherever. But we want to go in there to get our perspective. I was once in a township.
Yeah.
Like a proper, I'm talking about,
Kasi, like where things are real. Right?
Where
There's
things
like
are
a
real.
sewer running there,
Yes.
right the size of a cat.
And
running
because
past.
that's the people we are after. That's
Yeah.
the ones we want to actually have to, have a look at our podcast and want to challenge them to see, listen, take your laptop, start coding, start
Well, let's
educating
first
yourself.
get them a laptop, right? But,
Yeah, to get them a laptop, but most people got phones and stuff. So about 70% of Africa got smartphones. In
Yeah.
fact, it's a stat that we
The penetration
that we
rates of phones is quite high.
it's high. But the thing is, that level of good, it's something that was penetrated within the United States. Back to our first point on why they are so assured. You need to understand that level plays a huge part when you approach something, when you approach the working place, when you approach and you're going into that sort of environment, because the working environment is not fun and games.
No,
it's
it's not.
battle to the
It's
top.
not.
So it's a super competitive environment. We always tell our teams that, listen, we're all fighting for the same pot.
Yeah.
If you're in marketing or you're in pharma or whatever, all the other pharma businesses, all the other marketing businesses, we're all fighting for the same pot.
Yeah.
So it depends on what skill you're going to apply. You get me? That
Yeah.
level of, if good for us is having Pretoria, for argument's sake, or just let's say our sector where we are in. If good for us is to own this market, yes, maybe we'll own it, and then what then? If good for us is owning South Africa, well, what then? If good for us is owning Africa, if good for us should be having the skill in South Africa, and this is just one, but having the skill out of the township and selling that and getting other currencies into our country.
Yes, which we need.
Yeah. And,
Yeah.
and that's sort of the importance of that levels
Yeah.
that I think sometimes if people are sitting in a position where they are not exposed to different levels of good and different levels of functionality, how could something actually look?
Yeah.
Is it needed?
Let me start with this question first,
Yeah.
because I'll build on by adding to your point. Look, for anything to happen in grand scale, you're right. We need a big number of outputs that takes a widget and makes it 5,000 widgets. And for those 5,000 widgets can do a job, good quality job, without compromising on the quality, right? If you look at what Sustainable Development Goal 4 talks about, it talks about quality education, not education. There's a difference between getting a very bland education and very quality education. That is what we are lacking, right? So that's the first point that I want to touch on. The second point is there is a bottleneck. The bottleneck is a human bottleneck. And that bottleneck of humans is teachers. You can't achieve the scale of education and transformation we need in this country with just the teachers as the instruments of that change. You need tools, you need other sort of channels of education that can enable that to be multiplied, where teachers can serve a role where they, instead of a school that has, 20 teachers teaching 500 kids, right? You can have a school that has 10 teachers, even 5 teachers, teach 500 kids, but they're assisted by some AI robot, something that is much better at imparting knowledge and education than they are, number one. And number two, it needs to be quality education. Like, I want to emphasize the quality piece because many people walk out of universities and schools with the matric, with a degree. And when they get into a workplace, they are ineffective in doing the job. They're educated, but they are ineffective. There is an indictment there on the quality of education that they received because it hasn't taught them how to apply that knowledge in a way that is practical.
They need to go
Right.
through this
Yeah.
the 5-year practical.
Yeah, exactly. So I like your example, China, right? China has the number of engineers that are equivalent to multiples of populations of certain countries. They build stuff. They build things that work. They are the manufacturing hub of the world. They get things right to a T. Why? Because they have the skills, they educated their people, they have a very efficient conveyor belt of getting that skill in, out, apply them, put them in a place, get things done, boom. Yes, a lot can be said about other issues, human rights and so forth, but if you take the good from what China is doing to produce those engineers that are building real things that are valuable to the world, how is that not something to say, we can learn from that and bring it here and design a model that can, I don't want to say replicate it, but take and learn from it, Africanize it, and apply it in our context in a way that develops a multitude of African engineers. I'm just using engineers as an example.
And that was planned. The thing is
They
that that was planned.
They don't have unions in the way that our unions work here, by the way. They don't have a lot of the things that we look at as human rights issues, which obviously that's debatable, and there's things that are non-negotiables around slavery, etc., because there's things that are wrong. But at the end of the day, if we look at how unions are perceived in this country, specifically in education, is not always favorable, right? And it's not always favorable with parents, with children, with society, because there is a view that unions protect people that are in the unions that are paying members. They're not bothered by people outside the unions because it's a self-sustaining model. It's like any creature, it needs to keep itself alive, so it protects the interest of its own. It's like the parent families, like that's a human nature. But the union movement needs to think about its role in building the future educated engineers, scientists, doctors, and people that will make this country much greater. That 10x you talk about, you can't achieve it with the current framework. So that framework needs to be re-looked at in an honest way that requires us to really even question our own constitution. Because there's certain protections in our constitutions that probably inhibit us from moving us in a way that is disruptive. You talk about disruption. There's things in our constitution that perpetuates a very mediocre, very plateau-like gradual ascent. Whereas that's, in my view, and I agree with you, it's not enough for us to be a winning country in the scale that you talk about.
Well, I mean,
Do you want to add something there?
No, I wanted to add something, yes, but it's actually more of a comment, right? And it's to the solutionizing part of the issue here, right? And that is, if we can make it practical, right, then it's not going to be accurate figures. But let's say, for example, we require 30,000 schools in the country, or 2,000
Yes.
schools, or whatever the number is.
Yes.
That's going to take an extremely long time to actually implement effectively, right? Fact. Because just educating all of the teachers that are required, that in and of itself is going to take an extremely long time.
Willing, good teachers that are good human beings that are not
Yes.
going to bring their issues and traumatize a child.
100%. So now, and not to take the value of that out of it, right? But talking purely from a theoretical basis. Again, practical example. Let's say we are able to raise that money. We are able to build schools that can actually accommodate that amount of students, right? If you think about it from a theoretical perspective, right? Here's the question. Can one teacher theoretically teach, for example, 100,000 kids math in one class, the topic?
I think
Theoretically, and here's something that I just want to add on to it in terms of it from technology. And I mean, this is way out stuff. But the point that I'm trying to make is the same old thinking is just going to get us the same old result.
Yeah,
So I'm not
which
saying
is
this is the solution.
ineffective.
But
Yeah.
what I'm trying to say is
Yeah.
this might be the type of thinking that gets us to the solution. The point is this. Example, you've got a teacher teaching 100,000 kids with technology, 500,000 kids with technology, math, specific grade, right?
Yeah.
But the kid has got access to AI. Because here's the problem. You can't, 500,000 kids, many to one, can't ask questions. But theoretical questions, you can ask AI,
Yes.
right? So now you're sitting in a situation where you can teach theoretical knowledge to children, and they actually have AI which they can ask the questions towards and get the answers.
Yes.
Isn't this something that can actually practically solve for the theoretical challenge at least?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm going to take this bottle here. And this bottle, there's a liquid in here. This liquid has a chemical composition, which we speak about compounds, right? H2 molecules of hydrogen, one model of oxygen, and it makes something that is a liquid, right? And it's got different states, gas, etc., solid. And you understand the concept of how this thing is done through understanding the nomenclature of chemical composition and calculations, right? That's a science that is timeless. Science
It will
is
say that,
very,
yeah.
whether we are dead, our ancestors, certain things are universal.
Yeah.
Now, understanding this concept doesn't require rocket science teaching. It requires some basic tools that you use to teach
I get
people.
you.
And the example that I want to use, Stefan, when you say, can we do that in a scale? I'll use Khan Academy as an example, right?
Okay.
Khan Academy, this guy, Sol Khan, he was a very good maths guy. And he taught his cousin maths, right? And the cousin was like, well, I'm going away, or he was remote. And he's like, can you record the sessions for me? So Sol Khan was like, okay, cool. I'll record how to do an algebra thing, sent it to the guy. And the guy was like, great. And now I've got A's. And how did he get A's, that kid? The kid learned that by saying, Khan, just explain this. So Sol, just explain this. Pause, rewind. I'll read it again. Because in real life teaching,
Yeah.
certain kids are not very quick at grasping certain concepts. They
gotcha.
need to be replayed. So a human is ineffective in that way. So you need an avenue of teaching that enables kids to also learn at their pace.
Sure.
And when I use the Khan Academy, is because it's a very practical example how something that is in English, a language that is understood by many countries, it explains certain scientific, mathematical issues in a way that is very basic, that even sometimes the best of teacher in this province may not explain it as well as how Khan explains it. So if you find a person that's the best at a particular topic, they can create a curriculum and explain and break down certain concepts in a way that is childlike. And there's undisputed evidence to say he explained depreciation in a way that makes sense, and I can never misunderstand that next time I see an asset and I want to value its carrying value, right? Like there's certain things that you can teach that sometimes a human is not enough, and I believe that the future of education will not displace or replace human, but it will supplement human by bringing basic things that are taught. And then the human comes in and says, okay, now you are in Africa. In Africa, these are the kind of assets we have, and these are the kind of things that we value. Now let's modify and take that basic knowledge and localize it to this context. And guess what? We're going to send you to China, to America, to Europe. You learn how they apply this concept there so you can see how diverse this
Practically,
principle is applicable. There you're going to have a powerful person that has a global thinking, understands the basic, and they can create stuff that is sustainable. That's how you innovate, by seeing problems in a different way and coming up with a solution that is unique. But you got to have the right core skills, understand the basic principles, the fundamental principles very well. Otherwise, you're going to create a house of cards.
Well, and for me, it's really embedding the first principles, because there's a lot. Listen, my granddad and my father was both guys of super first principles.
Yeah.
So that's something in our family that really never got lost.
Yeah.
That there's certain things that they'll just tell us in a super practical way. And if I'm saying super practical, it's almost like sometimes I miss it because it sounds like
Too
a
easy.
joke.
Yeah.
It's too easy. But the thing is, that's something, and some first principles lead and help people to understand certain concepts in life way better. And I'm really, to be honest with you, there's some stuff that I understood in business way better because I understood the first principles
Yes.
of how things work.
Someone taught you that.
Yeah.
And you grasp it, and then you.
Yeah. And for a long time, so in my case, I was taught, but I never understood. The moment I saw it practically, the principle almost started living within me.
Yeah. Experience
so-
is the best teacher.
Yeah,
Gotta
yeah,
get your hands dirty.
So, but it comes down for me as, and I agree, because listen to it.
But how do we solve for that at scale? This is the point that I'm
Well,
trying to get to, because I think
we
everybody
sit with
agrees on
phones.
this. But
We sit with 70% of Africans
Yeah.
with phones. We need to start
Technology,
either, and that's why I'm
phones, quality. Let's say if you take a concept like Khan Academy, you bring it to an African child's mobile device. You bring it to a child's mobile device in Sizulu, in Xhosa, in a language they understand. You make that a quality content that makes sense, that a teacher will go, snap, not even I can understand, explain algebra or biology or
In this,
way,
yeah.
right? So that using technology, infusing a local flavor to it and scaling it and requiring cooperation with key stakeholders like unions, like the governments, like parent-teacher associations and various other stakeholders in the education space. They need to understand that this goal that we are trying to achieve will outlive us. So let's try and sacrifice certain things maybe now that will in the long term benefit our kids and ourselves.
why have we not? Sorry, DáNiel, but why have we not even heard something of this level of scale to be implemented in South Africa?
No, it's almost like we're thinking of the physical building that needs to be there first. But if I'm just thinking of this, it's not to say it's simple. Listen, this is not simple.
Yeah.
But it
But
is
listen,
not
it's
that
simpler.
hard if you go sit in a room and you figure this out, because we've got the curriculums. It's not. It's bad that it's not done locally, that it needs to come from other countries.
Yeah.
But if you look at this, the way you can scale this sort of education, you can say that it could be a requirement. It could become law or not to say law, but as you need to have your matric certificate. This could be something that could be equal if you go through this course. This is equal to a grade 8 or grade 9 or whatever the case might be. That's not for us to decide. But there should be some, because if you got a proper curriculum put together and you completed it, you went through your, why not? This is the
I
same
hear you,
basis of homeschooling.
I hear you, but again, my question is, why is this not super topical?
Stefan, I don't think our government, to be honest with you,
Yeah.
and I'll make a statement here now. I don't think our government wants to solve this issue. Because the more uneducated we leave our country, the longer they can fool them and fool us as a nation. Because if you've got a nation that's educated, the nonsense that's happening currently will not happen if you've got an educated nation.
We've heard these theories and they exist elsewhere, right? My example, Stefan, to your early example, if we were China, for example, China will say, we need 10,000 Sotho teachers, 10,000 Zulu teachers, 5,000 Xhosa, 8,000, I don't know, whatever tribe you want to choose. You guys are going to go to university. You're going to learn how to teach math very well, biology, science, all these subjects. Here is a bursary. Here's an incentive for you when you're done to guarantee get a job and earn a living. So go there, learn the skills, because why? We are building a future that is greater than where we are right now and your individual interests. So China has a method and a way of thinking that's very clear around the prosperity of the nation.
There's a clear
and
goal.
and they do
Yeah.
that. And I don't want to say this in a way that people may think that I'm being, controversial. Sometimes some countries are not ready for democracy because sometimes the majority don't know what's best for them because maybe education hasn't reached them in a way that they can make an informed decision, discerned, understand, okay, maybe this politician deceived me the last time and this time I won't fall for it because of X, Y, Z. And maybe I'll find someone else that I can choose. So I think sometimes even countries like ours, I would even say that issues of democracy and choosing things, it is possible that it could be premature, but it's the fairest way in the world of saying we are inclusive and we want it to be a decision that the majority agree on. But to your point, I think there's merits in China's model in how they've achieved prosperity that the world today cannot dispute. If something happens to China that will slow down the economy, commodity markets are affected, supply of certain renewable products, certain things is impacted, the world goes in a panic if China goes into issues. Why? Because they've been able to demonstrate how that very focused, clear, holistic thinking approach can create a nation that becomes an undisputed force to be reckoned with. So there's things you can take and learn from that model and apply to your context. Not to say that you take everything they do, but you say, these are the things that work and these are the things I want to bring here. But for you to do that, there needs to be political will. There needs to be people that think beyond their generation. And there's a saying that says, a wise man plants a tree knowing that they won't enjoy the shade of that tree. I don't think many leaders think that way. It's about the now. It's about
the
how
now.
so there's a very important thing around thinking around the long term and longevity of a nation that requires a certain thinking that, unfortunately, in my experience, I haven't seen our leaders think in that way that makes them should be selfless, and prioritize future generations.
So on that, right, big question.
100%.
And I'm gonna, and I think we should make it non-political. That's in terms of not going 2024, right? Barring 2024 and the democracy and the election and all of those
Yeah.
things, how do we, as a young generation, start raising up leaders that can actually do that? Because here leadership becomes a key thing, right? If
Yeah.
we actually can get leaders up there that start actually sort of driving these agendas, thinking in this manner, believing in themselves to that extent, and with a pure intent start driving these agendas, things should change, right?
Yeah,
But it becomes a question of leadership.
yeah.
So, case in point, right? How do you think do we actually start raising up these types of leaders? And I'll probe
Yeah.
you in this way. I'll share you something that I'm thinking. People need to be willing to actually speak up about these things and be willing to make a mistake and become teachable. Because ultimately,
Yeah.
I think there's a huge lack of confidence
Humility is also
with
going to
regards
be
to stepping
teachable.
up and say,
Yeah.
listen, I see this problem, I've got a solution. You get what I'm saying? Okay, but I'll leave that there. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Look, I think, firstly, leadership sometimes is only as effective as the season in which that leadership operates. Sometimes you need leadership that will get you out of apartheid and uses a particular method and style. Sometimes you need a leadership that'll take you through war. Sometimes you need leadership that will help you thrive in a time of peace. Leadership in different seasons requires certain capabilities to show up. Now, maybe your question, Stefan, is what season are we in as a country? What kind of leadership do we need today to be prosperous tomorrow and for that leadership to essentially be effective? Because if you're going to measure effectiveness by 10x, you want to say, okay, what are the KPIs that are needed for that output to be measurable as a success? And what inputs can we start designing today to get there? So you need to, in my mind, like I said, and maybe this may sound a bit idealistic, but a lot of things start with individuals. At a human level, there's a lot of work that we need to do to understand ourselves, our ethnic, who we are as a people. That's what instills pride and self-love and self-knowledge, because all of us are made in the image of God, right? Sometimes we look at ourselves and think we don't deserve to be on that table. But it starts there. And then you go to say, okay, how do we then inspire others to shine their light and get them to start having that self-confidence? A lot of that requires you to literally take your candle, take it to that thing, light it up, and it'll spark. And I just want to finish my train of
yeah.
thought here. Because what you realize on leadership, because this is a very important thing, sometimes in your leadership, you either inspire other people to see leadership in themselves that they didn't see, and they step up to solve problems that they know much better than you. So as a result of that, you're creating a multiplier effect. And through doing that, you are actually doing something that, while your intention was good to do this, there are ripple effects that are so beneficial to a society that you didn't think of in your intentions in doing that. But because you went to a human and did something good to that human, that person appreciates it and they will multiply it. But I think leadership for the season that we're in needs us to really be very focused, very disciplined, very clear around things that need to be done. It needs diligence. I don't think many people go into spaces with research, studies, thinking around the tools that are needed, being humble enough to say they don't know it all and I'll learn from other people. And arrogance and human conditions sometimes creep into the way of progress. So leadership, it's a thing that's studied for decades. There are business schools, there's whole MBAs that are done on leadership. But no, there's no silver bullet of what the definition of leadership is. It's contextual. It's based on an individual's lived experience on how they can apply themselves in the environment to be a change that is really needed in that situation or that context. So that requires a very important collaborative effort from different stakeholders to come to the party and, as you say, raise a nation of leaders. Am I mentoring a boy child today to talk to him about my lived experience and say, it's going to be okay one day because I've been where you are and these are the things that you can do. Here's my old tutorial book about maths. I'll see you next month and see how you're doing. That requires me to sacrifice what we were talking about earlier, about reparation. Time, going somewhere, doing something that adds value to someone that has less than what I have, and ultimately it will alleviate some form of suffering from them. That to me starts with self-leadership and then leading others, but as a servant of other people. The concept of servant leadership. I think that's what's important. But human values, principles, all those things sometimes help drive what that should be. And it's not always within an institution's control. It's within bigger things like family, like individuals, like churches, like companies, and other participants there, Stefan. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. I mean, my short comment is that I believe that everybody's called to lead, but lead at different levels,
Yes.
right? And I think it's important for people to discern that level of leadership gifting that they actually have. And once they've actually discerned that, go after it 100%.
And no, my time is up. And let go. Someone else can lead this better than I have.
That's it. But it's the
Good
power
point.
thing that always get them within the leadership.
Well, right.
It's the human nature that when they once in a position of power, it's almost like they don't want to let go.
Yes. Which begs the next question, and I mean, you can give a short answer, I think, if you'd like. What value do you think does a meritocracy have within the political sphere in terms of leadership?
Well, look, the political sphere is a very different animal. Meritocracy doesn't always rise above because there are human conditions. Look, politics by nature is a study of other human beings and how to influence and all those things. And if I am a political leader, I mean, even in the story of Shaka Zulu, if you watch it, and other, like Napoleon's, other great leaders, they will study their context, who's surrounding them, and surround themselves with people that will help them perpetuate their agenda. Are
Yes.
those people the best people for those jobs? Not always. Your meritocracy suggestion fails in a political
Not a
environment,
suggestion, question.
right? Question, sorry. It fails in a political system that's not designed to perpetuate winning. It's designed to perpetuate sustainability of that political animal, and that's not always in the best interest of the people that political party is intended to govern or rule.
But which is more right, though?
Look, that's why I work in corporate. Corporates are very clear around, we need skilled people, we need them to do these jobs. Here are the KPIs, and these are the things we'll measure at the end of the season to say you've performed well. Apply yourself, and then, this is what happens. In a corporate capitalist type environment, it's very clear what the cause and effect is. Yes, there are humans involved that will bring in politics and deal with that, right, and contaminate it. But it's a much fairer system than being in a government situation or government that has a multitude of political parties with different agendas that are not always are in the best interest of their constituents.
Got you.
So the problem with meritocracy in politics is that more often than not, very articulate, clear, visionary leaders could be cast aside by the most politically favored person. And that makes the meritocracy suggestion not work in a political context, but it could work in a corporate, civil society, and other spaces that embrace meritocracy. But there's human elements still in those spaces that bring politics that need to be managed as much as their best interest are this, because we are humans, right? But some environments, in my view, are much better at enabling meritocracy than others. Politics, probably one of the worst.
Listen, what worries me is that the goal of politicians, obviously, I don't necessarily think should be to stay in power for as long as possible, right?
Yes, it shouldn't be.
Yeah, and that's where the meritocracy thing,
Yes.
adds value.
And Nelson Mandela says, I've done my time, Thabo Mbeki. You went to school, you've done better. Take South Africa forward from now. I'm just going to step aside, spend time with my grandkids.
Yeah.
There are presidents today that are grandparents that are still clinging on power because they believe they're the best people to do their job.
The power
Yes.
thing that keeps them. If they feel that level of power, that's the thing. And it's
Absolute
almost
power
like
also
something-
corrupts, eh?
It's
Absolutely.
You saw that in
Absolutely
a couple
true,
of other
yeah.
countries.
Listen, another quick one. How important is large-scale entrepreneurship in South Africa and Africa?
Look, as I said, in this country, one of the things that concerns people the most is the high level of unemployment. One of the biggest solutions to that is not employment, because there's finite employment opportunities. It's actually creating businesses and enabling environments for businesses to thrive.
That's
So I
it.
think entrepreneurship is an absolute fundamental for us to reach that 10x goal that we talk about. But entrepreneurship has to be strategic. It needs to be timely and needs to be able to understand what are the opportunities that exist today that my entrepreneurship venture is going to solve and create value for me, for my family, for my shareholders and other stakeholders, and even for the community. Because as we were saying earlier, I was speaking about SDG 4, the world is becoming much fairer because people are realizing it's not just about shareholder interest, it's about stakeholder interest. As entrepreneurship evolves, entrepreneurs are now starting to think about the culture they're creating in their companies. They think about the talent that they bring in. They think about how toxic is this person in this team that's working so well? Can we get them out? I think about, well, my office is going to get burgled, right? Because crime is an issue. How do I create a relationship with my communities that they become bodyguards? Not literal bodyguards,
Well,
but they
we
become,
see that happening.
you know, like there are organizations that embrace the UN SDGs in an authentic and sincere way. And you can see that in how they prosper and how they become more sustainable than others that don't. So I think entrepreneurs today need to not just think about their skill set and what they apply and then the money they make. They need to think about, which is not what something that Milton Friedman would advocate, but they would need to think about broader societal issues that they solve for. It's almost like having a purpose-driven mission as opposed to a capital-driven mission. And that purpose-driven mission is a much more inclusive approach to creating what Harvard calls shared value. Because to me, shared value, ultimately, it comes to that.
Yeah.
So shared value within your partners, your stakeholders, and broader society. And it should also be shared value with generations that come after you.
And we've had this discussion actually in our previous episode that we really believe that everybody's got something to show or some sort of, well, obviously God created all of us in his image and that there's no person more important than, according to, our fruits that we need to bear on earth.
Yeah.
And the thing is, that comes down to the talents and, and that's why we really believe that there's a lot of talent that we're going to get out of South Africa.
Yeah.
And that's the fruit that the world will eat out of Africa and that we can sell. And that one thing that we are after is, for people to actually understand that, but it doesn't help. We're going to look for all these, racial nonsense that we're going through, that people need to start digging with themselves and start looking what's the talents that I have that I can actually convert and multiply for people to actually, come and get.
Yeah.
And that's why and I love it why you said that it's good for, or that you believe in the whole, not to say entrepreneurial thing, but that is important.
It's key.
Because I truly believe that. And I really believe that entrepreneurs, and in the previous episode, again, we said that I always, prompt people to become entrepreneurs.
Yes.
But there is a level of people that, or an individual that should not leave the corporate world because
But
they
our
are
education
placed.
system doesn't teach people to do that.
Yeah. Because they need to play their part there because that's super important for them to stay in that part.
Amen.
But for our 40% unemployment rate, that doesn't have anything to do. We need to enable them. And I really believe, and this is something I've been touching on quite a while, but our labor laws and our tax laws is not lucrative for any, outside investor to put any money in our country. Because of its being, not lucrative for outside investors, it's not lucrative for our country and people that actually currently selling, current services abroad. So people taking most of their money offshore. We can look at what's happening with Dubai. The tax laws and the laws that they, maybe not their labor laws, but the tax laws that they implemented are there to attract money. That's why there's obviously they investing a lot of money themselves, but it's obviously attracting a lot of global money towards them. And I cannot see how we as a country can re-look at these things. Listen, there's a lot that I do not take into the account. You're the two accountants. I'm the just wants to have the laws changed and so that the money can flow so that we can build businesses in our country.
Yes.
But I don't know if you ever thought of the whole, because you touched on the Constitution. This is the second time when somebody touched and said, our previous guest said we need to look at rewriting the Constitution.
I don't think that's a bad suggestion. I don't think it's a bad suggestion at all.
But what I want to get to is our labor laws and our tax laws. That's not lucrative for, foreign investors.
Yeah. Look, I have a few views, so maybe if I can comment on some
because
of the
this is
things
also
that you're
personal
saying,
opinion.
right? Yeah, I mean, everything I'm saying is my personal opinions also. I think yours, that's quite clear here.
Yeah.
Look, I think more often than not, guys, we are our own biggest critic as South Africans. I think there's a lot of things that are working well here and things that we are doing and things that we want to improve. We are by a long mile not where we should be, but I think there's a lot of things that we can be grateful for. I mean, I do gratitude journaling sometimes and I think about where I am and compared to others. The moment you start comparing yourself to others, that's when you're going to have that envy, right? Which is our another deadly sin, right? If you say South Africa compared to China or any of the BRICS countries, you'd be like, we don't deserve to be in that club, right? But if you say, this is who we are, this is what we have, and these are the things that we can do to optimize and to be better gradually and hopefully in a disruptive way, we need to do X, Y, Z. Yes, I agree. Our labor law, look, just generally with a lot of our laws, we are a country that was at a particular phase. We borrowed legislation from many countries that are much more developed than we are. We brought it here and applied it. And in a way, those laws are there because those countries existed for they industrialized years before us.
Yep.
And those legislations are done in a way that is so mature that that system is effective and has evolved. But we haven't evolved to a level where the legislation we have is in tune with the needs of this country. My view is that there are pieces of legislation that are absolutely important, that are needed. We can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? We need to be very surgical in how we look at each piece of legislation, each clause, each sector. And also not only look at them in itself, but the impact that they have on the economy, on employment creation, on value creation, and then how do we, with intent, review this. In my view, look, this is what I believe. I believe certain pieces of legislation should be there for a very finite period of time, and they need to deserve to be kept.
Yeah.
And then they get reviewed to say, is this legislation still relevant? You have legislations from the 1900s that are still there, right? And then you say, okay, this is still valid. And then you remove the bottlenecks. You grease the oil. You do whatever it is that you need to do for that legislation to do what? To have the desired impact. Now, I don't think we do that enough as a country.
I agree.
We have the judiciary, we have the executive, we have the parliament. These guys have to work together to create, as a team, by the way, to create something that is effective. But these different spheres of government don't always work together. even within Parliament itself, we've seen how
Yeah,
it can
man,
become
yes.
very comedic,
And to
how
be-
they
Oh,
behave,
no,
right?
it's-
And that in itself, people say get democracies get the countries they deserve, because here you're people voting and they get this. And unfortunately, that's where we are. Back to your education statement. But with that context is to say, how do we then start influencing in different ways where we can, lobbying, business, society, professional bodies to say, these are things that matter, Mr. President, Mr. Minister, Mr. DG. Please, can you prioritize correcting this? And people that organize themselves to say, we are not happy with our councillor this term. We want a new councillor. They speak about, I learned the other day, there's a school of governance in South Africa where they teach politicians how to exercise good corporate governance. I was surprised that even exists, because the governance issues that have existed in this country have been very shocking. But the fact that it exists is great. Do they have graduates that pass with distinctions? I'll ask the questions about that. But we have that.
And how
school.
do they implement that?
But governance requires more than just thinking about your self-sustenance. And that is a political animal that, as I said, I doubt in many cases they think about the interests of their constituents more than they think about their own interests.
Agreed.
So it's an issue that is there, has been there for a long time, it's probably be with us for future generations. But we need to find institutions, systems, organizations, and way to coexist with that political narrative that will create, as a whole, much better ability to progress as a nation.
Yes, and
But listen, I just want to say something on this, right? Because I think it becomes convoluted in terms of how technical it is, right?
Yeah, it's very.
that's what
And,
I agree.
and that statement, I want to follow up with the following. With regards to foreign investment, it's, in my mind at least, it's risk return. Foreign investment will come if there's enough return. And I'm not talking from a grant or a social investment or that type. I'm talking about big business coming to put a lot of money down in a country.
Yeah.
That's a risk return thing normally. And that's what I'm saying with all humbleness, not trying to oversimplify it. But it's a good starting point, again, I think, to sit down and say, listen, how do we actually create an environment that is stable enough so that the risk evaluation of the country actually aligns with the return that's going to, that the investor is going to get?
Yeah.
And I mean, there's a lot of factors that you need to take into account when you evaluate risk.
Yeah.
And I think with a few levers being pulled, that can be solved for at least to get a substantial amount of investment.
Yeah.
I think the legislative challenges and those types of things, right, are I don't want to say they're knock-on effects, but it's definitely not the low-hanging fruit. It's definitely not the low-hanging fruit. And also, I believe that there's a huge knock-on effect when huge investment comes. Because if the huge investment comes by creating a stable environment, right, where the risk and the return actually starts aligning, there's obviously going to be fruit that comes from that. And that will have a knock-on effect that brings investment, right? So I think there's I don't want to say a sober approach, but I think there's an easy approach to start off with, right?
Agreed.
Quick one before we end up, because it's a long one.
Yeah.
I know that you're really passionate about the UN SDGs, right?
Yeah.
So two things. Which one do you think is the most important if you had to choose one? And why?
Look, I think some SDGs are outputs of other SDGs, right? Things like poverty, for example, climate change, etc. To deal with poverty, you just need people that have the skills to work, right? So you almost need to look at how I think about SDGs, Stefan. I think about them almost as a waterfall. And you look at it at a human level, again, to say what needs to be in place for this to happen, and that, and that, and that. So if I was to take the SDGs, I would rewrite their orders in that chronological way, right? And I'm just going to use a few SDGs as an example. You take education. Someone gets skilled, quality education, by the way. They get skilled, and then they're able to do what? To get decent job, which is SDG 8, right? Through that decent job, they're able to innovate and design engineering products that will create, let's say, carbon capture, usage, and storage technology that is so in demand, and the world needs it, that it has an impact on what? On climate change, right? And then climate change has an impact on other things. But through education, you're also to instill good governance. So SDG talks about partnerships, governance, and all those things. So if you think about how the SDGs are written, people need to start thinking around how these things can be organized to affect the desired change and those change impacts. And if you look at each SDGs, and many countries have done national development plans, Vision 2030s, which is also the goal that the SDGs have, by the way, is to say these SDGs locally, how do we then make them relevant to our people? I think there needs to be a curriculum in all universities to teach people about SDGs. And I'm going to be a bit controversial here. Triple BEE is actually one of the things that is reflective of some of the SDGs. If you think about an SDG that talks about quality education in Triple BEE, there's points that you get for skills development. Unfortunately, not many people spend on quality skills development. They just spend to get the points, we're gone. So SDG 4 is met there. Decent work. If you look at SDG 8 and how it defines SDG decent work, it talks about saying, okay, we need to be able to have people that are skilled, provide value, brought into the system, inclusively the formal system, and then they're able to earn a livelihood to feed their families. Decent work isn't being, a street sweeper, with all due respect. Like, you gotta do a job that creates value. And then you look at an SDG that deals with issues of, I don't know, let's say biodiversity. Biodiversity is a science. You need to be skilled to understand what the impact on corals are on gradual increase in the different scenarios that you have of climate change to be able to provide interventions that will preserve the life of the corals and the fish and other sort of aquatic and marine life. So those SDGs have a very important role they play in themselves, but together they need to be considered almost as like a recipe. You decide, I want to have a steak, I want to have a cake, I want to have a pizza. How do you then calibrate and put together your SDGs to meet that output, right? And the last one on the BEE piece is around having women or black people, right? Like SDG, I believe it's SDG 5 that is about gender equity. Most corporates and companies are still male dominated at a leadership level. How do we as men say, you know what, we need to look at the composition here and see there's a problem if it's just men? How do we then bring women into the conversation? Because this SDG talks about gender equity, and what it means for us as men means that we need to check ourselves and bring women into the room so that there's a diversity of thinking. That's where the magic happens, right? There's a diversity of thought, etc. And gender, race, religion, many diversity dimensions are quite important to consider as you build this sort of journey. So I think SDGs are almost universally accepted. If you look at most countries' corporates, they have them in their annual reports, NDPs, etc. I think those are tools that can be used that could depoliticize some of the noise that's there around other concepts around triple BEE, indigenization, and many others that in some countries are seen to be controversial. But I think some PR needs to be done around that. Some work needs to be done to put that in our curriculum in a way that our kids can understand the spirit of the SDGs. In the same way that people try to understand the spirit of the legislation, if they understand the spirit of the SDGs, it'll then have a different impact on the intent they have when they go out into the world and apply themselves to make those goals a reality.
One question, don't you think the SDGs would have a way bigger impact, specifically for South Africa, if there's 100% equality regarding the benefits? Let's take like a triple BEE. Because, for instance, I know of a couple of companies that just implement that because of the tax benefit that they get.
And the deductions and the
deductions
level
and
one,
stuff.
and
don't you
get
think
government
that
contracts.
when that becomes, because education is not, and to be honest with you, it's not just like some of the black unprivileged side. There's I know a lot of white oaks. Some of my friends that went through that were not privileged to be in great schools at that, because there's a lot of sections as well, like you said a word, not the tribes. I said
Ethnic groups, tribes.
No, I cannot remember. You used the term earlier, but
English is not our mother tongue, yeah, so don't worry, I get you.
It was, but it doesn't matter. But there's a lot of, I know of a lot of, and especially if you go in certain rural areas. Don't you think that the benefit and the implementation on that, specifically in corporate environments, where you can implement that to educate a whole of, let's say, South Africa, that the impact of that won't, or maybe have a bigger, that it's not such a, for instance, because obviously if there's only a benefit towards one side, that it could become, if you now, let's just take how can I say, big environment where you maybe sit with somebody that can feel this, and the triple B is only benefiting the ones that were, you get me,
Yeah.
from their point of seeing the situation. So my question being is, don't you think if that's educational and the tax benefit, because I'm talking about, the tax laws that I'm not a big fan of,
Yeah.
that if you implement something like that, don't you think that the implementing of that would be way better and way
Yeah.
actually?
Look, I think I have a few views on that. So let's start with your point around, quality, etc. Right? On one extreme, you've got very privileged companies that use fronting to benefit from
Yeah.
BEE, that abuse
Yeah,
the legislation.
100%.
On the other hand, you have the unintended consequences where certain people that were previously disadvantaged, but they are of a Caucasian nature or racial,
yeah.
they are disadvantaged. Like, I think legislation in many cases has unintended consequences. And I think with things like triple BEE, I think the way to think about it is more around equity as opposed to equality. What does equity say? It says there's haves, there's have-nots. There's people that have benefited. Some people have benefited more than others, etc. How do we then put measures in place? It's almost like pay parity, right? Where you've got very privileged white males earning X amount, let's say $1, to use a common term, and black women that earn, let's say, $67. For black women to catch up to white males, work needs to be done to gradually increase their compensation over time to meet their peers if we're saying equity, and that means remuneration structures need to reflect that. But white males are not going to stay at one, right? They're going to also increase. So the road for this person to catch up to there is going to take a very long time. But my thing is that let's try to do something. Now, my view with BEE is that, as I said, it was designed with the best of intentions, but humans have taken that and have used it to their benefit, to their very greedy benefits in some cases. But also, I think in South Africa, I don't think any corporate can say we just want black people here. Well, many can, they probably do, but in my view, the strength of any organization is in its diversity. So demographics of this country are X. Your organization can't be purely black. You need to have white people. You need to have Indian people. You need to have disabled people. You need to have different diversity elements represented in your organization for you to truly thrive. That's why America is so great.
But you
it's a
get the point
melting
that I want to
point,
get to. I think
right?
if we drive that towards a more, like you said, with the diversity of the equality,
Yes.
regarding, it's almost like, and what I want to almost get to is, because I think if we can have all these nonsense that was implemented this last 40 years, it did not work. The last 35 years did not work. Otherwise, we would have been in a better situation. So I want to almost get to a point to say, listen, I want to explore the possibility of, because the whole BE concept I'm not against. And not to say I'm against BE, but the thing is I don't like the equality of it, because I do understand the intentions. What spirit
the
to get the
spirit
people.
of the law
The
and the
spirit of the law
legislation.
was to educate them.
The
and to-
implementation.
and the implementation now becomes it's just the other way around. Because
Yeah.
I know a lot of my white friends that doesn't get into and sons of my friends' sons that doesn't get into varsity. They need to go educate themselves because the system doesn't allow them to be actually have a place in there. So for me, it's almost like, okay, but how do we look at this that didn't work? We can agree it didn't work. How do we put this in place to get, to a place where, okay, but this, we are South Africa. As South Africans, what laws back us? And what laws put us in a position where we are South Africans? And I think to a degree, there should be some sort of, measurement, because, for instance, the oak that went maybe to, I don't want to mention a privileged school, should not maybe qualify for that. You get me? And I don't want to go into the criteria. My brain is super practical. I always want to jump towards the solution and putting the measurements into place. I want to talk as South Africa and want to get away from all
diverse
these
country.
things that they implemented that just created a lot of chaos within companies. And some of the oaks just, because I was privileged to be in a conversation where this was discussed with President Zuma, about 5 years, 6 years, I cannot remember. And
When he was still president.
when he was still president, yes, before all these things happened.
Yeah.
And there was a panel discussion, and the way that in that setting, how the BE and triple BE and the implementation of that were explained didn't make sense to me. I do understand the intent because I did understand the history of the whole implementation of it. But the inequality of the implementation, I can guarantee over time will just become another. You get my point.
I get your point.
It just will become a reverse. So it will be almost like this. You know, it's pendulum just swinging, and it just keeps on. We never come to a common ground to say, listen, let's just take this bloody BE thing. Let's have everybody that's unprivileged, that feel they're unprivileged, let's grade you. But then let all the companies be in a better position from a tax perspective and can claim from this. But let's educate the people, because we said to the country, unemployment. It's not only, you know, a certain party that's unemployed. I know of a lot of corporate guys, especially in pharma, that got laid off after COVID. Because in COVID time, obviously, there was
and it was indiscriminate that
and they
period.
call me, they ask me now for this, and it's actually embarrassing for all these folks that senior positions, and they cannot get work. There is no place for them to work.
Here's a question though. If we sort out education, does BE fall away? Triple BE?
That's a good question, though.
I don't think it does, and I don't think it should. I'll tell you why. If you look at a country north of our borders, Zimbabwe, some of the best educated people come from that country, right? Did it solve their problems? I doubt it, right? We've seen what happened now with the elections and all that, but without getting too political, I'm saying education alone is not the problem, but it's an essential component of a building block that is needed to create prosperity. Now, BEE in itself, let's look at BEE and what its components are, right? You've got an ownership piece that says, we want companies to be owned by black people, right? And you get a point for that, or points, right? And that adds up to eventually a score, right? Earlier on, when I was talking to you guys about companies that do low-level work and high-level work, the ownership there matters. BEE is trying to say people that play in high-value work, how much of those are black-owned? And if they're not, how do we transform them by bringing black people, as the spirit of the law says, with the view of saying these black people will learn, understand the skill. The important thing that BE gets wrong is to say, once you've learned, you get the skill, you do your own thing, you build something with that skill and that knowledge, get other people behind you, and like, it's also a bit controversial. What BE has created unintentionally, in my view, in some cases, it's created people that have participated in a lot of equity transactions that have become beneficiaries of dividends, of capital appreciation and other economics that are associated with that. There haven't been people that sit through that ownership on those boards, influence those companies to create better value that will create value for that, growing the pie, essentially. The ownership piece, I think there's a lot of issues there that need to be resolved. The management representation, management control, that's a skills thing. That's having the right people that can sit there and contribute and lead an organization. But if you look at some of the other pieces around employment equity, around skills development, around enterprise and supply chain development, to me, the entrepreneurship question that Stefan asked, the ESD piece is one of the most important enablers of entrepreneurship, because it makes these big companies to open their procurement networks to previously inaccessed entrepreneurs that can then supply. But those entrepreneurs need to be skilled, they need to provide good quality products and services, and that works because ESD, there's an enterprise, there's a development piece in ESD. That means that corporate that's procuring has a responsibility to upskill that young SME or entrepreneur with the skills to then be able to be so big that they don't only rely on that corporate, but they can go to other corporates and ultimately, and one day they'll IPO and be, you know, a listed entity, and then they've created value. So if you look at how the BE legislation and how the scorecard is broken down, those components have different roles to play. But again, it's also about looking at them not in isolation, like how I was explaining with the SDGs, is to say, okay, this thing was designed so that there can be shared prosperity. BEE in its name, it says empowerment. Black is a term that's used because the previously disadvantaged,
Sure.
that was
Yeah.
their power, their disadvantage. But economic means that economy, you look at it in tiers, you look at it in where values created, who previously participated, who wasn't. So Black people, economic empowerment, it needs to be true empowerment that's intentional. And when I say intentional, is not as much as I criticize fronting, where white companies use Black people to say we are transformed, and those people don't play a role. It's also as dangerous to have companies that are Black, that have level 1 BEE status, get contracts and procurement and work, and they deliver poor quality work.
Because I know those as well.
It damages the reputation of and the spirit of BEE, and it makes it the enemy that many people are saying now. This thing is a rubbish because it's produced so many successful individual Black people, but it hasn't been. And the nice thing about BEE, or not the nice thing, but what they did with BEE is that they added 2 B's before BEE, which is broad-based. Now you need to say, I need to include other people to make this thing not create a few elite Black people, but to share it with people that are not included. That broad-based piece is the important piece. I don't think we still get that broad-based piece right.
it's definitely
And
not.
that part is where, to your point, that broad base could potentially include white people that are disadvantaged, that are unemployed, that come from families where there's been generational poverty. It could, obviously, the majority of this country is Black, right? And the majority of people in poverty are Black. And those would be the majority of the beneficiaries of BEE. But I don't think BEE's intention should be to exclude people and perpetuate suffering. At a human level, I can't reconcile myself with the legislation that perpetuates any human suffering, because that is almost evil.
Well, that's almost for me sort of a solution for unemployment. I think if you're unemployed currently, you must, no matter who you are, if you're unemployed currently, you should be able to fall under within the BE system. There could be a different sector within BE. But you need to come within a system to get a skill, because most of the people that's not employed currently are lacking something. There needs to be.
But this is why. But this is why I'm referencing education. I mean, I think it's a high-level, simplified question, but the roots actually run very deep.
It does.
deep.
I'll explain the root of the question. Right. Ultimately, to move the country forward, I think everybody agrees that we want the best people in the right places, right?
Correct.
Right bums on the right seats.
Yeah,
And so
meritocracy, ideally.
Well, yes,
But-
meritocracy ideally, but I mean, I don't want to actually use that buzzword here, because here's the thing for me, right? I think everybody agrees that if you want to move the country forward, we want the best people in the right positions, right? Right bums on the right seats in the bus, and the bus moves forward, okay? And to me, I'm thinking Triple BE has a part to play, right, in South Africa's journey.
Yeah.
But it feels to me like if we drive education hard enough, there will come a point in time where it becomes unnecessary.
Absolutely.
And this is why I'm saying, this is why I asked the question, if we sort out education, does it actually fall away?
In the long term, it might. And let me use an analogy, right? If you look at someone that is injured, they've broken a bone, they need a plaster of Paris, they need a crutch, they need something to help them to slowly recover and to eventually be in good health. Now, when that person can run and they can do their sprints again or climb mountains, that person doesn't need a crutch anymore. Our country is using BEE as a crutch to heal the damage that was caused by apartheid. And in my mind, if BEE is there for a period that says we don't need this crutch anymore, definitely, like I was saying, every piece of legislation needs to be reviewed. And if we come to a point and you say this thing doesn't no any longer serve its purpose, it should go. Today, BEE definitely still has a role to play. It's still important. However, there are challenges in its implementation that we can all hand on heart and say we've seen abuse and problem across all sectors. But in my lifetime, I don't think BEE will go away. Will it eventually go away beyond my lifetime? I think it should, because it creates it could create a dependency problem.
I agree.
Or a mentality that makes people entitled to certain opportunities just because of their skin color or gender or whatever dimension is there. But today it's needed. And look, it's unfortunate that we're here as a society because of history and the violent history that we spoke about. Legislations like this have a role to play in building bridges, but there could become a danger, which is a situation in South Africa in many cases where people have become so reliant on things like grants, for example, It's made their life easier. I'll have kids. I'll do this. And I'll get money. And they have limited themselves so much that they've put a ceiling on their earning potential to a grant. That is a psychological
almost a
issue
trap.
that needs to be dealt with, much bigger than this conversation. But if you look at BEE, I don't want to say in the same way, but you use it as an analogy to say we've created this enabling environment for this community and these guys to benefit from this. I don't think BEE should be there indefinitely. I think today it has a role to play, and its implementation needs to be constantly reviewed. Look, I think guys like other political parties and people that say BEE should go away, what I haven't seen is an alternative solution that still has an impact on addressing the inequality that's still there today. I haven't seen an alternative to BEE that has been proposed that deals with the facts. Because if you look at stats, SA, unemployment, poverty, all those things, the majority of people that are suffering are still black people. So how do we do empowerment in an ethical way, in a fair way, in a way that deals with addressing the real issue? I haven't seen any alternatives, to be honest, and I'm still waiting for them.
I think you make a good point in terms of it having a place in the time that we face or find ourselves in, right? I do think, though, that it makes sense to say, how do we move the country to a place where BE isn't required anymore? You get what I'm saying, and that's the reference
We need
towards
to
education.
accelerate whatever that is.
In other words,
because
the
we
drive
can
or the
stay there
focus
forever.
shouldn't be let's keep triple BE because it makes this type of difference. The drive should be we're keeping it for as long as it is required, and whilst it is required, we're working on a plan to actually say, listen, we're going to reach a point in time where it isn't required anymore. With reference to, making reference to your reference of it being a crutch, and taking it back to
It's a national crutch, actually.
and you get what I'm saying, because it's got a positive and a negative side. You get what I'm saying? Where as opposed to getting the vast majority of South Africa to a point where they're educated and they can actually perceive and view themselves and believe in the value that they actually bring to the marketplace is much better than, you get what I'm saying?
You speak about recovery. I'm going to use sports as an example, right?
Yes.
If an athlete is injured, going back to my crutch example, that athlete goes through rehab. They can only recover as quick as the effort they put in their own recovery, diet, doing rehab, attending sessions with a physio. Like, you gotta do the work to accelerate that recovery. Similarly, for triple BE to quickly fall away as a crutch, a lot of work needs to be done to accelerate the recovery of the damage done to black people in a way that makes that crutch go away sooner rather than later. So I think I agree with your point. I think a lot of effort needs to be done, not only by government, corporates, civil society, other people that are part of this country, and international community, by the way, that when they do their FDR in this country, they appreciate that when I do work in South Africa, invest in South Africa, this is the reality that's here, and I need to be cognizant of why this legislation is there, and understanding what my responsibilities are, because I've signed up to the SDGs. I will take these SDGs and make them applicable in this country, because they have the same impact as a legislation that is intended to do what? Deal with inequality, gender, poverty, all the issues that SDGs want to achieve. So there's different ways of thinking about it. Sorry.
But, and for me, because I hear us speaking, but then I see there's two major issues. I see because that's what I'm hearing. I see the inequalities that happen, that we cannot, I think we pass it to say that did not happen. It's there. It's a fact, and it needs to be recovered. Okay, but then I see the 40% unemployment, and I'm looking at but I hear this side, but I want to really help these people, and my mind gravitates towards, if we sort out the 40% unemployment, it feels like this will almost be solved for. Not to say that it's just, you get my point. I'm sitting with these two issues and I'm thinking, but which one are the most important for us currently? Because this feels like it's almost like this dragging us towards solving stuff that happened, but currently our unemployment rate is just rising. Every year it's a bigger issue. And the current solution is not helping this unemployment. And I'm almost getting like a little bit, not agitated, but I'm like, angstig, what's it, anxious. I'm getting a little bit anxious because this number
That's why it's our
it's
biggest
just
worry.
getting higher.
That's why it's our biggest worry. And maybe to a point, right? I'm going to use an analogy of a boat. Back in the day, before, steam engines and all that, people used to get in boats and they used to row boats to get from A to B, right? Imagine if the people that are rowing that boat are South Africa. And that South Africa is made up of black, Indian, white, and there's a demographic that's there, right? Employment is your ability to have an oar and to row it to go from A to B. That's like a human engine, right? Now, if the majority of that boat is made up of black people, and the majority of those black people are unemployed or can't row, that ship will take long to get from A to B. So you got to teach those black people how to row, how to build muscle, how to build
I get you.
discipline. And that boat will go from A to B in a much quicker way if you deal with the issue of scale and the ability of that rower to be effective for the whole. By the way, if the country succeeds, all races succeed, right? But it's just how you get the most important levers of change activated and dealt with to have a bigger impact. China's advantage is that it's homogenous. Like other countries don't have the unique issues that we have and the history that we have that's also very violent and racist. But I think, as you said, we have an opportunity today to think about the kind of life that we want for our children and how do we want our children to live in the world that is inclusive, that embraces collaboration and partnership and doesn't alienate or demonize certain races, certain genders, sexual orientations, and many diversity elements, and lives in the spirit of I see you and I love you as much as I love myself. It's like the whole thing, do unto others as you'd like them to do unto you.
Yourself.
So I think there's many principles that are universally agreed. Even if you study ethics, that's the golden rule that everyone goes by, right? So I think it's important that people think about some of those things. They don't always do because human nature comes through, but at the core of it, that's the gist, man.
No, I get you. Listen,
But maybe it actually starts with people actually truthfully loving their brother as they love themselves.
But they have to love themselves first, because I can only love my brother as much as I love myself. If I see myself as a trash, I won't be able to love you as a piece of jewelry.
So that becomes an identity question, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, there's no way that we're just going to end off with that now.
Yeah.
So, I mean, how do we then solve for that?
I guess it's the healing thing that we spoke about and the individual work that needs to be done, right? Like, if I don't like myself, what are the reasons? What happened to me in my childhood that makes me believe that I'm less than, right? Work needs to be done for that person that doesn't love themselves enough. And that's an individual decision, Stefan. Like, no one should impose someone to go to a therapist and do work to deal with issues that make them not love themselves. But they need to do that work. And when they transfer that love to someone else, it comes from a very sincere place that says, I see you as a human. I see you as an image of God, because I'm an image of God. So we are both humans. And that means that my love to you is the same love that I'll give to my child. I would give to my sister. I would give to another person that I love, regardless of what we look like and our orientation.
And now I see it, Stefan, and not to say, Stefan, we agree on this, and I think all of us here agree on this, but this podcast, maybe somebody would say, yeah, but these oaks talk about these things. This is stuff that people want to fight about. These oaks talk about it, and it's
I don't think there's any blue eyes here.
No, but you get my point. Maybe
your
some
point.
people needs to see it and see how we argue about it and say, yeah, look at. But next time I'm in a conversation like this, I'm not gonna just walk away or get offensive. Maybe I must listen and hear what this guy's got to say, and maybe try to understand what his opinion or because I can clearly see this oak is not happy about this, and he's got a reason for not being happy, vice versa, whatever the side you are.
We started with communication.
That's
when
it.
we started the session.
Communication.
It starts with our ability
That's
to communicate.
it.
I need to sit down and
That's
say,
it.
I didn't hear you, Stefan. Say your point. I'm sorry I interrupted. And listen to understand, and I engage you.
Yeah.
But some people are not good at listening, so they are not effective at meeting people where they are. So our country, to do the healing, there's a lot of listening that we need to do, and listen to understand and listen to build.
I
and
agree.
not the stuff that we see today that alienates
for sure.
people.
I agree. I really do. To that.
Any more questions?
We
I
definitely
think
went
we've
over. Otherwise, we're going to go for 3 hours. I think we're close to 2 hours. We'll need to
But I mean, listen, it's a,
Listen
it's
to
a
a couple
beautiful
of
thing.
snippets.
It's a
Yeah.
beautiful thing. I think we're definitely going to have another episode. I know
We'll
we didn't
definitely
touch on
do
a lot of
too.
things
Rock
that
and
we
roll,
actually
man.
wanted
Yeah.
to. Listen, Thabo, thank you very, very much.
No, thanks,
I think you've given a lot of insight and a lot of things to digest and
Yeah.
given a lot of understanding on
No,
a lot of
thanks, man.
topics.
Yeah.
We're grateful for it, and we're actually looking forward to having you on the show again. Yeah, I don't think.
Look, I
don't-
think from my side, I want to give you guys kudos for actually starting this. I
Thanks,
think
man.
it's brave to put yourselves out there as white privileged males in a country that's dominated by black people that could see this and say, what do those guys know about suffering, about being a South African? And I think the conversation today has enabled us to engage in a way that is constructive, that is respectful, that we listen to each other and understand you. And I'm able to own the things that I don't know well. And I want to go back to the drawing board. But I'm meeting you guys where you are and say, we all want the same thing for this country to be
Exactly.
great. And as a Christian, I believe that we are all made in the image of God.
Amen.
I need to show the love to you and you that I have to my sister, to my brother, to my daughter, to my family, to say that I don't think you are intrinsically an evil person, Stefan. Daniel. I think you are good. Maybe you have blind spots that you don't have because of your lived experience.
Sure.
And I have blind spots because of my lived experience. But let's communicate and put it down and let's find a way to move forward
That's
together.
it.
So
Because
that's the thing. And I want to thank you guys for having this platform because it facilitates those kinds of conversation that this country needs, that all of us need. And I think it's probably one of the contributors to the healing journey that we need. You know, so
100%.
keep up the good work. Bring
Thank
people that have the same views as you, people that have different views to you,
yeah.
because that difference creates a really magical thing in spaces
thanks
like
a lot,
this. So
man.
well done,
Thank you.
guys. Keep it up
Thank
and
you.
Thank
best
you,
Thanks,
wishes.
Thabo.
Thabo.
Appreciate
Thanks
it.
for being with us.
Cool.
Thanks. And then for everybody watching, thank you for, this is going to be a long session. So remember to subscribe to the channel and we'll keep you guys posted. And obviously we'll have a lot of cool guests like Thabo in the coming sessions.
And
Cheers.
please keep the comments coming.
Cheers.
Ciao.
Cheers. Cheers. Cheers.